I declare open this public hearing of the Standing Committee on Regional Development, Infrastructure and Transport inquiry into local government financial sustainability. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we meet today and pay respects to elders. I extend that to other First Nations peoples. In accordance with the Committee's resolution of 4 August 2022, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on our inquiry's website. Those present here today are advised that filming and recording are permitted during the hearing. I remind members of the media to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. My name is Luke Gosling. I'm the chair of the committee, the RDIC Committee, Regional Development, Infrastructure and Transport Committee of the House of Representatives, and I'm the Federal Government's Special Envoy for Defence, Veterans and Northern Australia.
The Honourable Scotty Buchholz, Federal Member for the Seat of Right, and I'd just like to welcome you, Chair, Member for Solomon, to my electorate. My offices are just around the corner. I want to let you know that the people here today in the gallery are all wonderful people. Just for the benefit of those in the gallery today, let me firstly welcome you. Submissions today that we're going to be taking evidence from will consist of the Brisbane City Council and the City of Logan. At 10:30 there'll be a session then with the Scenic Rim Regional Council and Toowoomba Regional Council. At 11:15, North Burnett Regional Council and Banana Shire Council, and then at 12 o'clock, Western Queensland Alliance of Councils have their submissions. So this committee, Luke and I and a number of others, have been travelling throughout the country. Yesterday we were in Cairns. We've taken evidence from Western Australia in Perth, including the Kimberleys region and Margaret River. We've been to Launceston, we've been to Adelaide, taken evidence from South Australia. I don't think there's a state that we haven't...
We've been everywhere.
We haven't touched. And can I just say how privileged or proud I am that a committee of this standing, which is travelling the nation, is taking evidence in a regional centre in Queensland, and thank those councils that have given a submission for consideration today. And I'll hand back over to you, Chair.
Thanks, Scotty, and thanks for the suggestion to come up here. Folks from Brisbane who have driven up this morning, really appreciate everyone coming here. This is a beautiful part of Queensland, and thanks, Scott, for the suggestion. Some other members of the committee have given their apologies, but this way this smaller subcommittee will allow us to drill down on some issues that affect your local governments and your regions. The reason we've launched this committee is we know that there are local governments that are under stress, growing pains, etc., and there's all sorts of different local government areas, some with high rate bases, some that are more dependent on assistance from other levels of government. So we'll get into all that. And Brisbane, I'm not going to cut your time short, even though we started a bit late. We'll still make sure you've got enough time. So for the Hansard record, would you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee this morning?
So I'm Councillor Fiona Cunningham. I'm the Civic Cabinet Chair for Finance and City Governance at Brisbane City Council, and I'm the Councillor for Coorparoo. With me I have our Brisbane City Council Chief Financial Officer, Mark Russell.
Thank you both. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective Houses of Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion. I say brief, but really take the time that you need. it's an opportunity to make the main points you want our committee to take on board. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today on behalf of the 1.4 million Brisbane residents. So Brisbane City Council is unique. We are by far Australia's largest council by population. With over that 1.3, closer to 1.4 million residents, we operate under separate legislation, the City of Brisbane Act, through the Queensland Parliament. Despite what sets us apart, we face the same pressures as other councils in terms of our financial sustainability. The first area that I'll flag is grant funding. The unpredictable payment timing of financial assistance grants causes significant cash flow and budget challenges for us. We also have concerns about the administration of state and federal grant programs. These include onerous eligibility and application requirements, arbitrary funding allocations which leave Brisbane shortchanged, and co-funding and project delivery requirements which cannot reasonably be met given when those grant programs are opened, when the outcome is announced, and how the timing interplays with our annual Brisbane City Council budget cycle. The second main issue that we'd like to flag for discussion is cost shifting onto local government. In Brisbane, this comes in many and very different forms. These include shouldering significant responsibility for major infrastructure projects and subsidising public transport services at a scale which is not expected from any other local government in Australia, and a continuing trend of outsourcing state and federal problems to councils in areas such as childhood vaccinations, the management of invasive species, and even enforcing laws regulating Botox clinics, all without providing sufficient funding to council, if any at all. We also have challenges, Mr Chair, with disaster recovery funding arrangements and funding of betterment projects, which we can discuss if the time allows. We are the level of government closest to the people, and we have the capacity to deliver great things, but I firmly believe that this is at risk. We need a better deal, especially from the state government and the federal government, with greater funding, but more certainty and more respect from other levels of government. We're hopeful that the inquiry will be the first step into getting us there. And once again, thank you very much on behalf of Brisbane for having us here today. Happy to answer any questions or talk about any other issues. And I will, of course, defer to our CFO, Mark Russell.
No worries. Thanks, Councillor. And yeah, we certainly will have some questions. But first, we need to hear from Mayor John Raven. Can you hear us all right, John?
Yes, I can, Luke.
Welcome. Just for the Hansard record, can you just give us your full name and the position in which you're speaking with the committee today?
John Raven, Mayor of the City of Logan.
Great. Drove through your patch this morning on the way up here to Beaudesert. It was good also to give...
Your heart lifted.
Sorry? What's that, mate?
Your heart lifted, big smile on your face as you came through the great city of Logan.
I did. I took a photo, sent it to the Federal Treasurer. I said, you got any tips? And he said, no, the Mayor will be right. So, yeah, if you wanted to give us an opening statement, Mayor, and then we'll get into some Q&A.
Yep, I appreciate that. Good morning, Chair, Deputy Chair, members of the Standing Committee, especially the Honourable Scotty Buckholz. Great to see that the committee is meeting in your patch today.
Thank you,
John. A few months ago, Logan City Council made a submission on a number of key themes that affected sustainability of local government. I've been a councillor for 8 years and the Mayor of Logan since March. In my time since becoming Mayor, it's become clear to me that the biggest threat to local government is financial sustainability. Increasing costs are hitting us hardest. We're financially stretched. Peak debt is on the horizon in 10 years for us, much sooner for other councils, and operating costs are exceeding revenue. Those costs are often outside of our control. Civil construction costs have increased by 25 to 35% in the last 2 years. Electricity costs are up 22%. Parks and maintenance 19%, and everybody's favourite subject, insurance, is up by a whopping 35%. We're doing everything we can to maintain manageable debt levels, but as the fastest growing city in the state in the middle of a housing crisis, we cannot stop building housing enabling infrastructure. Our main source of revenue is rates, but raising them to match the cost is unaffordable for the community, especially during a cost of living crisis. We're taking measures to make our organisation more efficient, to deliver more with less, which is stemming the bleeding, but it's just not going to be enough long term. Logan has recently reviewed our local government infrastructure plan. It's a 10-year plan that has to consider affordability. It was done in 2021 using those prices from that time, and based on that, our city needs roughly $2 billion of roads, water, sewer, park, sport and community trunk infrastructure to support our growth. Based on the income we receive from infrastructure charges through development, we've had to cut $800 million out of that 10-year plan so that it's affordable. We're currently adjusting that number to include construction cost escalation, and I fear that the amount of infrastructure that will be cut will be more like $1.4 billion by the time we're finished. This will impact the quality of life of our residents. Our councillors are forced to make impossible decisions about what critical infrastructure can be put off for another 2 or 3 decades. Keeping up with asset management and renewals is a huge challenge for us as well, as we absorb donated assets from developers that are often gold-plated, but because they're in the PDA, we don't have control over the standards they're delivering. We have $10 billion of infrastructure on our balance sheet, but our communities are still screaming for more. Logan is the youngest and fastest growing city in Queensland. 30% of our population is under the age of 18 and they love their sport. But the fields and clubhouses are ageing and in desperate need for upgrades that we can only afford when we get help from state and federal government. Because we have to prioritise roads, water and sewer to keep housing supply going. We also have a huge out-of-sequence PDAs, 2 of them, sucking infrastructure funds away from the natural growth funds that need upgrades now. We're no longer asking for capped infrastructure charges to be raised, as we know that is not politically palatable. What we need is help from other levels of government to deliver that vital infrastructure project that support housing and livability. Without that help, our communities will suffer and housing supply will grind to a halt, and no one wants to see that. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the committee. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Yeah, I thought you must be one of the fastest growing areas, and we've heard evidence from a number of councils that are in kind of growth areas, growth corridors like yours, that you know, when you consider the land required for sporting fields and then the infrastructure itself, that's it's pretty costly, and yeah, that there's a bit of a lack of infrastructure to keep up because there's so many kids wanting to play sport. Can we? I'll just start with you, Mayor, and then go to Brisbane. I've been asking all of the local governments about this around the country, and just trying to calibrate our sense of what you kind of define as financial sustainability for your local government areas, and how you're measuring that before we sort of think about you know, going into some of your recommendations a bit as well.
Yeah, so we have a very advanced growth model that we've developed as part of our new planning scheme to be able to understand exactly where our growth is happening, what's that costing, and what revenue we're getting from infrastructure charges. Particularly important for Logan because of those 2 priority development areas, which are approved by Economic Development Queensland under a separate planning scheme. And they actually charge double the infrastructure charges when it's in the PDA, but we can't do that in our own development fund. So when we look at financial sustainability, it's our ability over the 10 and 20-year forward planning to be able to afford trunk infrastructure. So we're not talking about bells and whistles. We're talking about the core infrastructure that either developers will connect to, or that existing programs and grant funding from other levels of government will support. Our ability to meet that 10-year LGIP target of $2 billion has just been wiped off the table. Cutting $800 million out of it before we even consider construction cost escalation means that I've got a list of red projects, I call them, that whenever other levels of government want to talk to me about election commitments, I'm like, here's a list of about 80 projects that I can't afford over the next 10 years. You can pick any one of these. We know we need them, often for safety reasons, but also for functionality and being able to provide a good quality of life for our residents. You can pick any of these projects and the community will love you for it because we needed them about 5 years ago.
Thank you. Brisbane?
I guess from Brisbane's perspective, this year, all councils have adopted new financial sustainability ratios, and we very much measure our performance based on those new ratios. Brisbane is actually in its own category and has its own targets as part of that framework. Like Logan, we have been significantly impacted by reduced revenue over the past few years and significant cost escalations across not just core services, but also the major construction contracts that we have in train at the moment. The other issue around infrastructure charges is also challenging for Brisbane. They have reduced significantly over the past few years, and Brisbane is also impacted from the declaration of PDA areas from the state where we're still required to provide certain connections in terms of infrastructure. However, we don't get the revenue. I think for Brisbane, the other major issue that is been significant for us from a financial sustainability perspective is the significant portion of our budget that actually funds state activities like public transport. Brisbane is the only council that actually funds public transport. And that's about a $140 million contribution each year in operating costs to run that network. In addition, things like our infrastructure investment into public transport over the last 10 years is about $1.4 billion. So again, the ability to take that cost on, to finance it and to service that debt is significant, particularly with the current economic conditions that we have. Rates can't solve this alone. While council is large and our rates revenue is about $1.3 billion a year, a 10% increase is still not going to solve this problem. So we are, particularly in a cost of living crisis, constrained in terms of our revenue, particularly from an operating perspective. And so we are really reliant on some better deals in terms of the capital infrastructure that we're delivering to enable us to continue to grow and meet the demands of Brisbane residents.
So is that buses and trains or just
Buses and ferries
Buses and city cats
Yeah.
and ferries.
in Brisbane.
Okay.
We actually carry about $1 billion of debt associated with transport assets that council owns.
And recently we've been undertaking the Brisbane Metro project and we've been actually improving state government infrastructure, but we've had to pay for those improvements to state government infrastructure for the metros to run along the Queensland Government's busway.
And we will donate the assets back to the Queensland Government because we don't own them.
Right.
But investment was required to deliver the transport services that is needed in a growing centre in Queensland.
And he's grown, that's for sure. Feel free to take this on notice if you need to, but keen to get a breakdown of your sources of revenue, so what percentage is met by rates, other sources of...
Yeah, we'll take that on notice. What I can say from a grants perspective, though, right now, is that our grants on average are between $100 and $150 million a year. Our revenue base is about $3 billion, but our total expenditure this year will be $4 billion because of the significant infrastructure program that we...
What was that figure for your grants again?
It's between 100 and 150 million.
And they're federal assistance grants or some from the state as well?
They're federal assistance grants, some are state grants, some are grants specific to things like the City Deal, where there was a fixed contribution for Brisbane Metro, as an example, as part of that agreement. So it does move around a little bit depending on what infrastructure we are delivering, but generally it's between 100 and 150 million.
Thank you. Mayor in Logan, can you just give us a bit of an idea of that the breakdown of your revenue or take it on notice if you need to. Just keen to get an idea of what percentage of your operating costs is met through grants and what's from your rate payers.
So I'll take it on notice to get you accurate numbers. Our rates income sits at about 55% of our income. Then we have fees and services. Charges are essentially developer charges that set at about 25%, and then everything else comes in through grants and other income streams through water and places like that. So but I'll provide you a proper breakdown in a notice response.
No, thanks very much, Scotty.
Thanks, Chair. One of the things that seems to have united councils across each of the state borders is the when we focus in on the grant program, more so on the FAGs, is the timing of when that money hits from your balance sheet, whether or not, because I believe it comes from the federal government through the state government, and we're hearing this overwhelming request for a greater line of sight to just knowing when that money's going to hit your balance sheet for councils that are disadvantaged, where they factor amount of money that's scheduled to drop. It doesn't. Do you guys experience, through your Brisbane City Council, experience anything in that realm?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So grant funding programs continue to be structured in ways that is really problematic for us in Brisbane. So programs are often released with short timeframes to prepare applications, often only 4 to 6 weeks. It's especially challenging for a large council like Brisbane, where council committee approval timeframes usually require a minimum of 4 weeks notice and 4 weeks lead time. It's difficult to develop those projects and required supporting documentation within the time that we're given from the feds and from the state. Grant programs are often targeting specific policy objectives. However, the objectives don't always match actual infrastructure needs to our local government areas. Programs require projects which are shovel-ready. It's really difficult for councils to maintain a list of shovel-ready projects at any one time throughout the year, which is being expected of us. Timing of the programs is problematic, requiring council to commit large amounts as co-contributions without an ability to obtain approval through the necessary budget process and changes. The programs generally don't allow councils to recover all of its costs in relation to a project, thereby effectively increasing the co-contribution amount that councils are paying. And one classic example that I'd like to raise for the committee is the Thriving Suburbs program. So it really, for us, it sounded fantastic on paper and one thing that we wanted to go after. So $350 million for capital cities over 3 years for community infrastructure, but unfortunately we had a number of challenges. The program guidelines were released on the 29th of July this year, so just after councils had adopted their budgets for the year. There was initially only 4 weeks in which to respond to the federal government. I believe it got extended to 5 weeks, but it's not a long enough time for councils to be able to consider this properly and put it together. Councils could submit up to 2 projects each, which is not necessarily problematic, but when you consider the size of councils in South East Queensland compared to councils in other capital cities, it's quite imbalanced. You could fit about a dozen Sydney councils into Brisbane, and our neighbours like Logan and Moreton Bay are also a lot bigger than metro councils in other capital cities in Australia. The submitted projects needed to be shovel-ready, meaning all plans and approvals had to be in place and that work could start that year. Given the amount of funding on offer, up to $15 million per project, and that the funding was available over 3 years, you have to ask what the logic was in needing to start the work that calendar year. Most projects worth less than $30 million don't take 3 years to deliver from when the shovels hit the ground. We understand shovel-ready requirements when you're talking about an economic stimulus grant program, but it's not what this was meant to be about. councils needed to co-fund 50% of the project as well. And it's not always a problem in principle, but how can councils commit to fund 50% of a multi-million-dollar project in July when they've already planned and released their budgets to residents for that financial year? The guidelines also suggested that projects needed to have a business case, design and costings and development approvals all completed. That has so many issues within that time frame. Councils in Queensland had their elections in March this year, and many mayors and councillors made clear which projects were their priorities as part of the process, and now they have a 4-year term to progress those. The funding program would have been such a great opportunity to assist councils in Queensland in fast-tracking those projects if there had been some foresight prior to the elections. We have district sports park projects planned for our outer suburbs in Brisbane, which would have met the stated goals of thriving suburbs perfectly, and with funding support we could have delivered a project by 2027, but because it had to be shovel-ready and we had to have a DA approved and we had to be ready late, to go by late this year, Brisbane completely missed out. So it was incredibly disappointing for us, and I'm happy to provide even further detail to the committee about the problems that we have experienced with the Thriving Suburbs program.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair, could I also talk about financial assistance grants really quickly?
Yep.
So the timing is significantly problematic. So just as some examples, in 21-22 we got 49%. Was paid prior to the end of the financial year. In 2023 it was 79%. In last year, in 2023, that we found out we were receiving that payment right at the death of the year. We'd already borrowed. So we'd already made a decision about how much we were going to borrow and lock that in. 2 weeks later, we get cash hits our bank account. Often the cash hits the account before we actually get the notification in terms of payment. In 23-24, last financial year, we understood there was going to be some sort of prepayment. Again, we got right to the end of the year. The Australian government notified us that you were paying it, but there was not
for it.
prayed for it. But unfortunately, there was not enough time. The state didn't pay it until July this year. So all those things obviously significantly impact our operating position, impact our operating ratios at year end.
Impact how much we're borrowing.
How much we're borrowing and the financing costs associated with it.
What we can take on, what we can't take on. It's
Do you make
really
investigations as to why the anomalies with the payment periods?
We have requested consistency for a number of years. I suspect that it's something around state budget and potentially holding the funding, because that suits their position. If there's excess funds, they push it through. Definitely some of the early years, COVID impacts give you 100%. It's just the uncertainty. We just really need to understand, is it coming,
when's it coming?
It's really the March period where we need to understand, when we're making decisions about do we borrow, do we not borrow, how much we take in. Otherwise we end up in a situation where we start the year with too much cash and we're trying to fund that and service that when we actually didn't need to do that until much later in the year.
Johnny from Logan, did you want to make a comment around the payment periods around grant funding or anything, or add comment around that thriving suburbs?
Thanks, Scotty. Much to the same sort of sentiment as Brisbane, we just want consistency and predictability around when the fags are going to be paid. At the end of this financial year, we had a position where we went from being like $30 million in surplus to being $2 million in deficit. A big part of that was because fags got pushed back to be paid after June 30. And there was just no warning that that's going to happen. So it's very similar messages to what you're hearing from Brisbane. If council starts our budget process now in sort of October, November, and it really, big decisions have to be made by March, I don't understand how a federal government with many, many more staff, Treasury Department is amazing. They're much more qualified than our teams are. Surely by March they've got an idea of what they're going to pay and when, and they could give us a notice so we can plan for that. government just loves consistency, just like business does. So if you just make it consistent and transparent, that'd be great. We have less problems with shovel-ready projects than Brisbane do. I appreciate the size of their council makes it difficult, but the applications we make are on projects that we know we want to deliver anyway. They're already shovel-ready, and that's my understanding from talking to ministers, that that's what they're looking for, quick feed-in. But at some point, those projects do run out, or if the timing is wrong for a new grant round, anyone can be caught unawares, because 4 to 6 weeks minimum is what it takes us to have a council decision if we do need to find more budget for whatever reason.
John, is the problem the federal government's not getting the money to the state quick enough, or is the problem that the state's not getting it to you, it's not flowing through the state to you quick enough, or is it a combination of both? Do you have a line of sight? I like the questions on the table.
We don't have a line of sight on it. Yeah, we've asked questions, and it's always a bit of both from the feedback we're getting. There's a bit of unpredictability on when the feds release the funding, and then there's also unpredictability on the state in how they occasionally they review which councils get how much, and there's some delays on their end as well. So nobody's entirely to blame. Everybody's got some responsibility. But if we just make it really predictable with clear deadlines each year, like what the amount is going to be in March, and then you get feedback from the state that you'll be paid. If they want to pay us in July, that's fine. We just need to know that.
Yeah.
So that
you don't care when, as long as you know when.
Yeah.
And it happens.
Yeah.
Exactly.
See, that's
right.
stuff that we should be able to address.
It's the certainty.
Yeah, absolutely. And the flow-on cost to you then having to do adjustments for your figures when there's such a large chunk of money that's scheduled to come in that's either that doesn't.
It's completely avoidable too.
It's actually just
we could avoid this problem for everyone.
Yeah. Right, George.
And it looks really chaotic. So when you're doing your when you're presenting your finances, and all of a sudden your what you're forecasting is completely wrong, it actually lowers people's confidence in government, because they say, well, how did you get it so wrong? Don't you know what you're doing? And really, it's just out of our control. But that's a hard message to communicate.
Yep. No, I agree. I just want to focus in on some of the challenges that you guys have being larger shires, and the relationship that you guys have with state and federal governments. We've already touched on the thriving communities. Have any of you been successful with any of the grant projects in that space yet? Brisbane?
No. We this week actually we got notified unsuccessfully in terms of thriving suburbs and the local government stimulus partnerships program. Unsuccessful again in terms of the contestable projects into that.
How'd you go, John?
Really well. But it's a different approach, right? And so it's something that we were bad at last term, and I observed that under the former mayor, because he had a different approach, almost like a combative approach to identifying the best projects to submit, which took time. Instead, I took a collaborative approach that said, if we've already got a project in stream, let's put that, and it meets the criteria, let's put that forward. That's been really successful. So we secured our $8 million fine from the state, and then another $4 million on top of that from the stimulus program. So it's good.
Okay. Well, I'm sure all the successful applicants will be openly and available for public. Is there another round coming around, or is that it?
Not for thriving suburbs. For stimulus, it's over a number of years. So yes, there will be.
Roger. So I'm interested now to understand the relationships that, as larger councils, the relationship you have with the state government. We hear right across the country, with white noise about the Local Government Australia's request for an increase in fags, and that is a horn that is blown at nauseam. But we don't get to see what the request is from local government to the state government. I mean, what's the advocacy that you're asking of those guys?
Do you
Brisbane.
want to go first? Yeah.
We have been having this conversation with, obviously, with LGAQ in terms of the motions that we are moving forward, and that is a regular one, I think, from all councils in Queensland, is trying to move financial assistance grants as a percentage of revenue back to 1%. I think it's at about 0.5 currently, so it's probably half of what it was 10 years ago. So in terms of, I guess, that sort of lobbying to try to grow that share, our main avenue is back with our partner councils and with LGAQ to try to move that forward.
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on this. Thanks, thanks committee. I think it's not obviously just about the relationships. I would take, of course we always want more funding, but I would take a stop to the cost shifting, quite frankly, that we're seeing on local government as a win. And it doesn't seem to matter what amount of advocacy we do on this. It just keeps coming, and I'd really like to share some of the examples that we experience in Brisbane. We've seen a pattern of Queensland government decisions requiring local government to address state government issues, and we're not funded to do it, and it happens time and time again. So we've already talked about how Brisbane invests $140 million every year in operating funding to subsidise the cost of public transport in our city. We provide childhood vaccinations with council funding 65% for delivery of immunisations. There's been an amendment to legislation requiring council to take responsibility for management of fire ants on council land. We have a legislative requirement to collect the emergency management levy on behalf of the Queensland Government, leaving council out of pocket, as the fee provided for collection has only increased by 10% since 2005. In comparison, inflation has increased by over 60% in this period. There's legislative requirements on us under the Environmental Protection Act to undertake audits, investigations and enforcement to prevent impacts on the community and the environment. There's obviously as well maintenance of Queensland Government assets, including boat ramps and pontoons. With ongoing significant population growth in the Brisbane area, council is delivering several major transport infrastructure projects in partnership with the Australian Government. The projects are designed to relieve traffic congestion, support faster and more reliable public transport and expand active transport options for our growing population. And these projects you'd be familiar with include the Brisbane Metro, our Kangaroo Point Bridge, the Moggill Road Corridor upgrade and the Lyndham Rail Crossing upgrade. The Australian Government's funding is fixed at the commencement, meaning that council holds all the project risk with respect to the contract escalations. A unique example to council is its contribution to public transport and infrastructure, which we've already canvassed. As Australia's fastest growing major capital city, increased investment in public transport and infrastructure is critical for our city and more broadly for South East Queensland. We've invested $1.4 billion to establish and maintain capital infrastructure to support bus public transport, and again $140 million a year in operating funding. It's a significant impost to council, but one that is expected of us and one which we continue to do. It ultimately adds to our pressure though, and I think what we're asking for is please to stop the cost shifting onto local government.
John from Logan, anything on cost shifting?
Cost shifting hurts us every day. It's been going on for years, as Councillor Cunningham's outlined. The latest is the tattoo parlours and Botox clinics. Again, council is a service provider, so we're happy to provide a service that we're paid for. We often become the service provider of last resort as well. So if the state government isn't providing a service or isn't meeting its obligations, the community expects that their council will, but of course doesn't want their rates to go up, pay for it. There is no equivalent between councils and state like there is between councils and the federal government of bags. There is nothing like that for major councils. Small rural and regional councils have some funding programs, so do Indigenous councils, but the councils that are building the houses and bearing the brunt of change and growth don't get any additional support except through grants, which, as Brisbane's already outlined, has challenges around the when you apply, how you apply and how successful you are. We're fortunate that we have not put our toe in the water of paying for public transport, but there is an expectation in South East Queensland because Brisbane do it, why doesn't Logan? And so we're holding the line against that because we know if we start doing it, we simply will not be able to afford it, which is the experience Brisbane is having right now. Rates are being driven up because they're fulfilling state government obligations because their community needs and expects it. And unfortunately for Brisbane, because they are the capital city, they're actually funding and subsidising my residents to get into work because everybody comes to the CBD to earn their coin and then brings it back home to spend it in Logan. So what we would love to see is a program similar to FAGS from the state government that just acknowledge the role that local government plays. And that way, when they do shift costs to us, we've got some funding to support us in that because they will continue to do it because we are often the best level of government to deliver a service because we're closest to the people, we're the most efficient, and it makes sense. They just need to provide us the funding to support that cost shifting so that we can remain sustainable.
Yeah, by all means, move us to the position where we deliver the service, but we'd like some funding to do it.
Yeah. So if
we need some funding to do it.
So hypothetically, in that cost shift, and you're not alone as a big shire, I mean, the smaller shires struggle with it as well. But if, hypothetically, if there was an increase in FAGs, there's no guarantee that the states wouldn't just cost shift the increase, the federal increase, of another cost centre to your council, thus rendering you net neutral.
Yeah.
That's correct, but at the moment they're doing it anyway.
That's right, there's no upside.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll just hand back to the Chair.
Thanks, everyone. Just wanted to go to workforce quickly, just to get a sense of how you're going in attracting suitably qualified workforce in your two local government areas. I'm particularly interested in whether there can be a role for the federal government. We want to bring through young people and get them trained up and have them see a future working in local government. Not to influence how you answer, but how are you going with workforce?
Look, it's been challenging, both from a skills perspective, but also with
which skills in particular, sir?
They tend to be more the technical skills around engineers because we've had such a significant capital infrastructure program over the past sort of 4 years. And just keeping them because the market is very competitive, so we might be able to attract them. Sometimes they can turn over really quickly. Planning a couple of years ago was obviously very hot for us as well. Applications are down a little bit at the moment, so that's not such an issue. I think the other big challenge for council is with, I guess, the development of a next future generation of employees is really around cost control. So we are absolutely in a situation at the moment, but due to cost escalation, cost shifting, and all those things, where we're having to try to reduce our operating costs. And one of our largest operating costs is our labour. So things like our development programs around trainees, cadets, and all those sorts of things are also impacted by those sorts of things. Not ideal, and it's a bit short term in some ways, but we just need to be able to weather, I guess, the current economic climate and then come out of that with, I guess, a view around our operating revenue and some operating revenue improvement. So from a skills perspective, was more of an issue 2 years ago. But absolutely, due to the size of our workforce, we do have about 8,000 employees, a mix of permanent, mostly permanent, temp and some casual employees. Our transport for Brisbane is our largest employer and is our growth area. So where I talk about cost control, bus drivers is where we are employing and have been for a number of years. Both due to the, I guess, ensuring that we are meeting KPIs in terms of our network, but also with Brisbane Metro and the need to expand our coverage in that respect.
Thank you. Mayor at Logan, how are you going with the right people with the right skills in the right jobs in the local government?
So because we manage our own water network and sewer network, we're seeing significant shortages in the engineers and skills required for those networks because the whole region is growing, so everybody needs the same skills at the same time, and the private sector is competing as well, and they can always outprice us. So if they're going to the highest bidder, Brisbane's fortunate as the biggest show in town, they pay the best. As the third biggest council, we pay third best. So we've really got to offer either quality of life or a great working environment, great culture to compete with that. I had an interesting conversation earlier this week with a high school principal who said that when she first took the role on, which was about the same time I became a councillor 8 years ago, Logan had over 70 trainees and over 50 apprentices, and a lot of them were being fed directly from our school. And she asked me, now you've got less than 10 from what I can tell. Can you find out why? And the answer came back to us from our people in culture branch is because there's less funding available from federal government programs. So being able to do that extra training with local young people so they get jobs locally, they stay local, they realise that council is a great career pathway, and being able to get their foot in the door early so that they can become a trainee and work all the way up to hopefully being a director or a CEO one day would be amazing. We've recently transitioned away from having external apprenticeships and trainees, managing them internally. It takes a little bit more work, but improves the culture greatly and shows higher retention. So we're doing everything we can to get creative because we have so many positions vacant at the moment that are either filled by temps. There's more actors than there is at the Oscar in our structure because everybody is acting up, and attracting new talent is a huge challenge for us.
Yeah, because if you're a talented young person that's got a bit of go on them, and you look at an apprentice wage and you look at other things you could be doing that would pay you a lot more. One of the things we're finding is we're going to need to do more with apprentices because often they're a bit older now as well. They've probably stayed in school a bit longer, and they may not necessarily stay with mum and dad for a long period of time. Whereas in the past, if you had young 15-year-olds staying with mum and dad, they could handle the low apprenticeship wage.
Yep.
But you're a bit older, then you've got a lot more things you want to spend money on, so you take a job that pays a bit more rather than, seeing it as an investment that you'll get a trade and you'll get a higher wage at the end of your apprenticeship. But just out of interest, like your trainees that you're bringing in internally, and I congratulate you for that, as long as they've got the mentoring and support around them, of course. Are they, what sort of wage do you reckon they're on out of school?
Oh, they'd start anywhere from, depends, if they're FTE equivalent, they're probably on like 35 to 40, depending on the role they're in. But they're not usually full-time. Yeah. Because they're either doing it in school traineeships, so they're working either part-time 1 to 2 days a week, or they're doing work on the weekends if they're working in our library. Interestingly, for us, we need a huge number of plumbers, and our plumber numbers are ticking up. But because of the limited range of skills that we teach, we have to sort of take plumbers on and then job share them out to make sure they get their gas and pipe work skills, because all we can really do for them is water and sewer. Yeah. So there's a little bit of creativity required with us, and any help that the federal government could provide to make that job share arrangement easier for an apprentice, because we don't want to lose touch with them. We don't want to give them to a trade and then that trade pays them way better than we can. We never see them again. We really want to maintain that relationship because it is a great working environment here. They get great mentoring, good support, but we can't give every apprentice all the skills they need to finish their trade, which becomes challenging.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. That makes total sense, and that is something that I'm personally, and something the committee is interested in, is how the federal government can play a bit of a role there, because local government is a really good employer, but if there is a way of sharing that talent so that they get a more fully rounded skill set and do some work with the private sector to get that, then that's obviously a good result, and people can come in and out of local government as well at different levels. Thanks for that, Mayor. Really appreciate it. We've got a bit of time left, but I guess I wanted just to move to, in the time we've got left, just go to any final thoughts or any final questions that you might have, Scott, but then any final thoughts you've got. We'll start with Brisbane.
Awesome. I think what I really like to spend the time on is disaster funding.
Yep.
I think Brisbane, like Logan, back in 22 was significantly affected by the rainfall and flooding event in February 22. And the increasing frequency of natural disasters adds additional pressure to council's financial sustainability. And there is a need for ongoing commitment by all levels of government to meet the costs of natural disasters. So widespread damage across Brisbane in February 22 and the cost to rebuild and recover had a significant impact on council's finances. While funding relief is provided by the Australian and Queensland governments, the extensive evidentiary and resource-intensive process inhibit access. So it is requested that a reasonable assessment criteria for public assets, particularly like roads and drainage, is established, which recognises the impracticality of requiring pre-event images to support claims. We were in a situation where we actually were able to provide inundation photos and professional assessments of damage, but they weren't accepted from the Queensland Reconstruction Authority as appropriate evidence. What this has meant is that we have missed out on about $50 million worth of reimbursement of costs to rebuild and recover. The criteria applied in 22 was significantly stronger than the 2011 event. In 2011, our contribution was about a third, so about 33%. In 22, it's more than 65% as a council and a $300 million impact on council's bottom line. I guess the other piece that I want to call out was really around betterment. So we've put a lot of submissions in terms of betterment with limited results, even to the point where I'll case an example. There was Kedron Brook was significantly damaged in the flood event. There was a bridge, a pedestrian cyclist bridge that was wiped out. We put a betterment application in to move it to higher ground, about 100 metres down the creek path. It wasn't approved because it was a new location. They would fund rebuilding the existing bridge in the same location, but not something that was actually going to withstand the next event.
Yep.
They're the sort of challenges, I guess, that we absolutely have. When we talk to QRA about the reasons why the change in substantiation, it all comes back to the auditors. Obviously, federal government's half funding it, Queensland government's funding it, and there's a strong audit process of the acquittal of those claims. What we ask for is that we look at the criteria in terms of what the evidence is, because there's no way Brisbane, with its thousands of kilometres of infrastructure, can have pre-evidence photos of every pipe under the ground or every road on top.
If you were to draw a ring around your Brisbane Council city area, like how big is it? Like how many kilometres across? I'm just trying to get an idea of it in my mind's eye.
I'll get back to you before the end of the session.
Yeah, no worries. You've got for as long as it takes.
I don't want to give you the wrong figure, but I have seen the figure, and it's quite substantial.
You can take it on notice as well if you want. All right, Mayor John, can you bring us home, please?
John, just before you go to your closing statement, another number of shires are regionally across the states have mentioned, and I was prompted by your conversation on your comment on water infrastructure, that you guys own your own. A lot of the infrastructure in regional shires is coming to end of life, and if we work backwards from that WASP program back in the 50s or 60s or whenever it was, can you just, in your closing statements, mention, give us an overview on your water infrastructure and how you're holding that up?
Definitely, Scotty. So I'll start with Brisbane's last question. We're 998 square kilometres of land mass, and when you're managing water across that network, most of it exists in about 30% of our population, and our land has sewer and water connected to it. But we've got the two biggest burdens on us from a water point of view are Yarrabilga and Greater Flagstone as the two PDA. My closing remarks centre around the challenges that out-of-sequence development like PDAs and greenfield development poses to our sustainability. When we're doing infill development, we know that the cost of infrastructure for a new lot is roughly the cost of the infrastructure charge cap, which is $30,000. As soon as you get to greenfield, which is most of our growth, we've got the highest regional plan target for greenfield. Nearly 80% of our growth is meant to be greenfield. We find that our infrastructure cost to deliver is $60,000, while we can only charge the developer $30,000. That's a critical issue because it means each new lot, while yes, it's growth and it's more rate, takes it roughly 22 years to pay off that debt for the infrastructure after it's paid for its operating and services that it does. So that puts us behind the 8 ball a long way. The further challenge that we face, particularly with the PDAs, is that we have an agreement by which we must provide infrastructure to them that is completely out of sequence and not needed for the rest of the city for at least 20 years. We have to provide that. They provide 40% of the cost. They pay that back over a 25-year period, but we have to borrow the other 60%. It means that some of the fastest growing suburbs in the country, like Park Ridge, Logan Reserve, and Chambers Flat, do not have safe infrastructure. Park Ridge Road is a joke. It's so dangerous, and we should have upgraded. We should have started the upgrade work that we're doing now about 5 years ago, but we just weren't in a position to do it because the finances that we would use to pay for that were being drawn to a much smaller population that's being serviced in Greater Flagstone and Yarrabilba. That is a structural sustainability problem that we can't get away from. That will mean when we hit peak debt, we still won't have built the infrastructure that suburbs that are growing now need in 10 years. It's a critical issue for us. Disaster management is a problem as well, but fortunately for us, because we're a younger city, a lot of our housing and infrastructure is built away from the major flood zones, whereas Brisbane doesn't have that luxury because they are the capital city that's been there for so long. But what we've found now is there's an expectation post-COVID that government will save the day and will help with things that we've never helped with before. So after the Christmas Day storms that swept through, there's an expectation that council and government would come in and clear trees for access on private property. That's something we've never done before, and while QRA provided its funding for it, it wasn't enough to cover it. The shortfall was about $3 million, and that's before we start trying to dispose of all the green waste that we collected when we did that. I think at last count we had something like 35,000 cubic metres of mulch that's just sitting there needing to be managed on council land because we had to clear it from properties first and then find a way to dispose of that or use it over time before it rots to nothing. The challenge around water infrastructure and sewer infrastructure is real. We built one new wastewater treatment plant in 2018. We've got another one to build this term, 2027, 2028. Most water engineers will build one wastewater treatment plant in their lifetime. Our guys will have built 3 by the time they finish a 20-year stint at Logan City Council. They cost somewhere between the Cedar Grove wastewater treatment plant was $900 million.
Yep.
The Chambers Flat will be about 1.3 billion by the time it's completely finished. We do it in stages to make it manageable and affordable. We're shutting down one of our wastewater treatment plants in order to be more efficient. That's the Beanley treatment plant, and focus it into Logan Home, which is a very modern treatment plant with lots of good technology and biochar, so we're processing the waste into a product that we can resell to the agriculture industry. But even with all of this innovation and really looking for ways to save $1 everywhere we can, they're still incredibly expensive to run. And if you just keep charging punters more to access their water network, it just puts more pressure on their cost of living. So what we're lucky with is that Beanley is our oldest wastewater treatment plant, which is why it's getting shut down. But most of our network otherwise is relatively young because we're a city that's about 40 years old. The parts that we absorb from Beaudesert, probably the most challenging part, to be honest. But they'll all get renewed as part of the work that we're being forced to do in Greater Flagstone and Yarrabilba.
Your shit's problematic.
Thanks, John.
Chair, Chair,
Thanks very much. Final point.
I have our square kilometres if you're interested, Chair. It's 1,342.7 square kilometres, 190 mainland suburbs as well as islands in Moreton Bay and over 2,000 parks.
So where's North Stratty? Is that not in your patch? That's further north? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, yeah, that helps to get it in my mind's eye. Well, thank you both for your evidence today. If there's anything else that you took on notice, just please get that to the Secretariat by the end of the month, by the end of October. And just from memory, that was a bit of a breakdown of revenue.
Of revenue costs.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. That'd be really helpful. But we really appreciate your time and safe travels back to Brisbane. And thanks for your time. Yeah, we'll send you a copy of the transcript of the evidence that you gave today, so you'll have an opportunity to request any corrections to transcription errors. But usually it's pretty good, but you'll have an opportunity just to read through it and say, oh, no, I didn't mean that, I meant this, or what have you. Thank you very much for your time and look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks, Committee.
Cheers.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Scotty.
Thanks, Brisbane. Thanks, Logan.
We'll crack straight on with the Scenic Rim Regional Council and the Toowoomba Regional Council.
Ollie.
And we've got Mayor Jeff McDonald online. Can you hear us, Jeff?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much, and good morning, Chair.
Great.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the time.
Have you got Mike Brady with you?
I've got Mike Brady, the GM of Infrastructure Services, yes.
Great.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning,
Thank you.
Mike. I'll get you to repeat all that in a few moments as we start the session formally. But yeah, thanks very much for joining us. And we've got Scenic Rim in person. So Scenic Rim. Yeah, Tom, we've got you down as you're the mayor. It's got CR there. He's the mayor. But you're the man. You're the mayor. And
Councillor.
had a yarn, told some stories to David earlier. Thanks for your time, David. And
Oliver.
Oliver, how are you, mate? In a minute, I'll get you to tell us what you do anyway. So, I'd like to welcome both Scenic Rim Regional Council and Toowoomba Regional Council. I think you were here at the start. By just way of protocol, I'll just inform you that our committee resolved in 2022 that we will broadcast these hearings on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry's website. Those present here today are advised that filming and recording are permitted, but we always remind our friends in the media of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. We've already met, but my name's Luke Gosling. I'm the chair of this committee and have the great privilege of representing the people of Darwin and Palmerston in the Northern Territory and the Federal Parliament, and also got some additional responsibilities in Defence, Veterans and Northern Australia. And it's great to be here, as I said. Scotty.
Thank you, Chair. The Honourable Scotty Buchholz, Federal Member for the seat of Wright. This is my home electorate, and as I mentioned earlier on, it's a privilege to have the committee here taking evidence in regional Queensland, particularly in our hometown and neighbouring shires. So welcome everyone, and I welcome those from the gallery here today.
Thanks, Scotty. For the Hansard record, we'll just start with Scenic Rim. Can you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? And we'll start with you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Thomas James Sharp, Mayor of Scenic Rim Regional Council. I'm joined by Mr David Keaton, CEO, and Mr Oliver Pring, our Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you. And Toowoomba?
Thank you very much, Chair. Jeff McDonald, Mayor of the Toowoomba Region, and I have with me the General Manager for Infrastructure Services, Mike Brady.
Gentlemen, thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective Houses of Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement. We'll start with Scenic Rim. Home side kicks off, and then we'll just proceed to Toowoomba and a bit of discussion as you just saw with Brisbane and Logan. Over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. And just before I make a brief statement, just would like to acknowledge the committee and thank you for coming to our region and allowing us to provide feedback. It is greatly appreciated. I'd also like just quickly to note that the previous two councils that we had here should be noted as two of the smallest councils in the southeast corner. We're privileged here to be here with Toowoomba today, who's actually the largest, and I think Scenic Rim might be the second largest, because everyone always thinks of population. They don't think of the size of the area that people are responsible for. And I think you'll find Toowoomba, well, Jeff will speak to his, but I think it's something in the order of 13,000 square kilometres, and we're over 4,600 square kilometres.
And that has implications for road networks and so forth. So each council's different, and that's why we're trying to get a broad range. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Scenic Rim Regional Council provides a wide range of services and infrastructure to meet the needs of residents, business operators and visitors to the region who contribute substantially to our local economy. Meeting these needs is a challenge for Council, which has a relatively small ratepayer base from which to raise funds. With a population estimated to grow to 67,000 by 2041, the key challenges will be meeting the expectations of current residents as well as future residents, attracting new businesses to provide employment opportunities and assisting existing businesses to expand. Currently, 70% of Council's income is from rates, with the remaining 30% from grants, fees and charges. This is not sustainable in the short and medium term. Over the next decade, Council will need to allocate funds for the renewal, replacement and maintenance of more than $1 billion of community infrastructure, as well as the installation of new infrastructure to accommodate the region's forecast growth. Rates alone will not have the capacity to meet the needs and expectations of the region's local communities. Funding from other levels of government can often be too prescriptive, and competitive grant processes may place less resource councils, such as ours, at a disadvantage in securing valuable funding. Funding criteria for grants means councils may sometimes need to put forward projects which meet eligibility requirements rather than those which best meet community needs. The timing of federal funding, which is not aligned with financial years, makes it difficult for local governments to plan for the design and delivery of capital projects, as well as achieve more accurate budgeting. And you heard examples of that earlier today. Whilst the financial assistance grants should be increased to 1%, this funding to local government should be scheduled so as not to distort end-of-year financial reporting, as is currently the case. To address these shortcomings, Council has developed a 5-year capital works program To fulfil that program, Council needs the federal government's commitment to untied capital works funding as per the long-term financial forecast required of councils by the Queensland Government. This would allow for thorough planning, professional project management and transparent procurement leading to the delivery of projects that additionally will provide local jobs and support the regional economy. Federal budgets do not address the core need for infrastructure, the foundation of a prosperous economy and social well-being. The nation's infrastructure shortfall is now 30 years in deficit, and a line needs to be drawn in the sand to properly address the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Toowoomba.
Thank you, Chair.
Over to you,
Thank
Mayor.
you very much. Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Firstly, can I simply apologise that we're not there in person? Would love to have been, but other commitments have made that very difficult today to do that. So would love to have been there in person, but appreciate the opportunity to be on teleconference.
All good.
And,
you're coming through loud and clear.
Loud and clear. Well, that's terrific. Thank you, Chair. Do appreciate it. And thank you to the host member there, the Honourable Scott Buckholt as well. And there's another member of your committee who knows our area very well also. So we very much appreciate that. But again, thanks for the opportunity. This is the first review in 20 years of local government financial sustainability, and it couldn't come at a better time, to be honest, so very much appreciated. The Toowoomba Regional Council is one of rich agriculture, historic towns and diverse landscapes. Toowoomba and surrounding towns provide important services, employment and cultural activities for a population of around about 175,000 people. The Toowoomba region, local government area, is a network of 31 rural towns surrounded by agriculture country, state forest and natural waterways. Approximately 62% of the population lives within the Toowoomba city. And Toowoomba also functions as the Western Gateway, an inland port, if you like, that services trade in and out of the agricultural areas of the Darling Downs and southwest Queensland. And we're also a solution to many of the southeast problems in regard to congestion and to population growth, along with industrial land. The council is an amalgamation of 8 former local government authorities, spanning, and thank you to Mayor Tom, he got the number absolutely correct, 13,000 square kilometres is the geographical footprint of the regional council. And council's worked tirelessly since amalgamation in 2008 to bring communities together, align service expectations, and most importantly, position the organisation to maintain a financial sustainability rating as determined by Queensland Treasury Corporation as sound with a neutral outlook. Council's been vigilant in reviewing all elements of its financial performance, including but not limited to undertaking service reviews, as well as seeking support from external agencies such as Queensland Treasury Corporation and the Queensland Audit Office. Whilst Council is doing everything in its power to review the breadth and levels of service provided to our community, we have significant financial pressures as a result of being a large and growing regional hub that provides services and associated infrastructure beyond our resident population base to those of southwest, southeast Queensland, to the northwest New South Wales. There's a number of issues that we'll cover off on, but I'll just highlight a couple very quickly, and that's firstly around the current federal funding model, which we believe is completely broken, and we need fair, timely and untied funding. The second of which is around the financial assistance grants, getting to at least 1%, and that ties in with the fair, timely and untied funding. And of course, housing issues, housing shortages are one of those that affect not only the nation, but certainly across regional Queensland and definitely in our region. And certainly as a result of the lack of supporting infrastructure is one of those main reasons. So, Chair, I'll leave it at that and more than happy to answer questions.
Thanks very much, Mayor. And if you want to start having to think about it, after this next question, I'll ask you to, for those recommendations about how you would work out a fairer distribution model. Increasing the quantum of the federal assistance grants is one thing, but then there's also the issue of fairer distribution. So if you can have a bit of a think about this, and I'll...
Just while you're on that, Jeff, can I ask you also, just to give consideration to your comment, that the funding model is broken, can you outline, give some thought for a later response to the state funding model and how the federal funding model compares to the state model? If ours is broken, is the state model the preferred model of delivery?
Terrific. Thank you. Definitely do that.
Thanks. And if we can turn, you might have heard me ask the previous witnesses, what's really helpful for us is to get an understanding of how your local government area defines financial sustainability, what's important there, and how you measure that, and then maybe if you just want to go on, then Mayor or your team to talk about any recommendations for the redistribution model.
Thank you. Will do, Chair.
If you want to kick off,
Would you like me to address that?
please,
right
Senator
now?
Grimm. Yeah.
So,
Just that definition, measuring, and then any recommendations for federal and state
I'll
distribution.
allow the CFO and the CEO talk about current models and measuring sustainability. But one thing that we prepared for you, which we'll deliver today, is a document that shows, I think it is $60 million annual shortfall in terms of our capital replacement of our assets. And so when we budget annually, we can only spend with what's in our means. So what we've done is presented to you the figures of that shortfall forward out to the next 5 years. Beyond that, 10 years, the figures get a bit rubbery, but it's where we're at now, and it demonstrates exactly that we cannot sustain ourselves. It cannot paint you a more clear picture than that. So we'll provide that document to you today.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just going back, in relation to the sustainability indicators, obviously they were referred to earlier by the chap from Brisbane. I'm not convinced how much value they're adding at this point in time, and within our submission we make the point that what is the reward for operating a good budget, and what is the penalty for not performing well as part of that budget process. Now, at the moment, those checks are not really done appropriately unless it's through the Audit and Risk Management Committee, with obviously we have 2 independent members that go through from there. But trying to work out a budget without knowing what the level of the financial assistance grants is going to be, again, the councillor from Brisbane indicating that you do not know the timing of the funding programs. How long does a program or opportunity need to remain shovel ready? Now, our issue at the moment is trying to identify shovel ready projects. That means spending money beforehand to do that due diligence on the project, to get the designs in place, to make sure the proper town planning approvals have been acquired, to make sure ownership of the land has been determined, then to go to the marketplace and try to get the best value for money, because over that period of time, costs have gone up on simple projects. So it is very, very difficult. So much, I never thought we'd have so much in common with Brisbane, but from what I heard today, the commonalities are amazing. Sorry.
No, the only other thing is in terms of the current model. I mean, we're challenged with the restriction placed on the model. Council is successful in obtaining grants, and certain restrictions around leveraging the grants, the state and the federal grants. It's probably one of the key things that we found in previous past that wasn't an option, to be able to, council contributing 10%, the federal contributing the 45 and the state the 45. So that's now no longer available in some of the funding streams, which sort of makes it harder to for councils to raise those significant sums to fund some of those key trunk infrastructure.
Can I just reinforce what the officers said? It is difficult to apply. In previous local government, you were able to apply for state government funding, federal government funding, and local government funding would be used as a catalyst. So you would have a three-way partnership that was occurring. That doesn't occur now. I'm told it hasn't occurred for about 3 or 4 years. If we can get the biggest bang for our buck out of the 3 levels of government, I mean, if you're doing it another way, you would also bring in a charity group or someone else like that to actually make it a 4-way partnership. But at the moment, it seems that the other 2 levels of government are going down their own funding paths and don't want to get involved with any, with the exception of city deals, any cross-fertilisation, so to speak, of funding grants. So,
We heard some evidence from the previous councils around the Thriving Suburbs program. Did the Scenic Rim apply for any of those?
yes, we did, and we'll probably have a little bit of a whinge here, if you don't mind.
Small ones, all right.
A small one, that would be great. We fit under 2 different funding categories under the federal government. We fit in the Greater Brisbane area funding one, which I think was the Thriving Suburbs, if I remember correctly. We have been funded a small amount, if I remember correctly, through that.
Yes.
But then we've also been funded through the South East Queensland Stimulus Program, both in the competitive and the non-competitive area. So we're very happy with that. Our concerns is in the competitive area, we now need to go back to the budget to bring funds back in to make sure the project can be delivered, because the uncertainty of not knowing when we will actually commence a project or be funded for a project. Now, we still have other funding applications there that if they come through, we will need to go back to council to seek approval to turn around and say we are no longer doing this project because we have got this project that's been supported by funding. It is difficult for the officers to go back to the councillors and say the budget we have adopted is now changing as part of a first quarter review and as part of funding being either successful or unsuccessful.
Well, it's a good thing there's a number of your councillors in the room so they can hear about the difficulty that you have in that regard. So I just want to acknowledge the local councillors from Scenic Rim that are here. Thanks for coming and taking an interest in the work of the committee and this consequential inquiry that we're undertaking. So if we can just go to, did you want to add something, Mayor, or we can go to Toowoomba?
That's fine.
So Mayor McDonald, if you can just reflect please on, in your patch, how do you see financial sustainability for your local government? Any points on measurement tools and any points on whether you think we're going to improve the way that the financial assistance grants in particular could be distributed?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for that. I think broadly, just an overarching comment, if I could, around sustainability. It's interesting. It's like many words that have been used over the last half a dozen to a dozen years. Sustainability for you and me might mean different to others in the room.
Yep.
And therefore, it was good to have the State Department of Local Government have some measures that we are all aligned to.
Yep.
The challenge we have is that financial sustainability is one measure, and it includes all of those elements that we report on, 9 different elements. But there's also another measure that's not measured as hard and fast, and that's around livability. And therefore, financial sustainability as opposed to lifestyle sustainability are 2 different matters. One can always fit into an envelope of financial sustainability by cutting out things that the community need for livability. And that's what we're finding. We're finding those pressures are immense, and therefore we fit to our, I mentioned earlier, around maintaining our credit rating of sound with a neutral outlook. That's by design. But it does mean that things are slipping away from us to try and bring them back from a lifestyle perspective. That's a measure that I'd love to be able to be talked about from a federal and state level as to how you can actually measure that, the livability side of it, and it would need quite a bit of thought as to how that can happen. As far as distribution goes, again, and mentioned earlier around the footprint and size of our council, 13,000 square kilometres. The rate of growth, I think, in areas should also be included in those measures of how that's done. But I don't think any council will deny that the councils that have an inability to rate their residents need greater support than those that can. But I probably concur with Mayor Sharp. At an average year, our income base is between 80 and 85% of our ratepayers paying that. So 15 and 20% from external funding from grant. That means that our ratepayers feel the brunt of any reduction in funds that come to our region. And that's why I raised the financial assistance grants, dropping from 14 million to 6 million. That's an $8 million fine that our community needs to maintain, just to maintain the level of service we deliver. So there needs to be a better and richer discussion on how that is determined, the distribution of that. And I'm sure we can get to that point. So that's where I say the system needs a better look at. From a challenge perspective with the state, and it was mentioned earlier in a previous session in regard to infrastructure charges capped at $30,000. We're seeing, even in our brownfield sites, that our cost to deliver is much higher than the capped amount. And coupled with that, when we have ministerial designation allotted to likes of housing, schools, hospitals, where infrastructure charges aren't levied to a point where they need to be, in fact at all, that's an impost, direct impost onto our ratepayers as well. So that definitely is something from a state perspective that needs to be looked at. But we feel that the gap between what it's costing us to deliver the infrastructure and the cap is growing. Bitumen alone for our area is up 50% since COVID, a 50% increase. So all of those things are adding to livability costs because we're cutting back on the things that we must do to deliver critical services and essential services. So that's where I say that the system is broken. We need a greater fair share to look at that livability sustainable measure as well as financial. So I hope that's answered a couple of things there. Mike Brady is here from Infrastructure Services and might just add to that if you don't mind, Chair.
Yep, thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Look, just financial sustainability and asset sustainability, we do have a ratio for asset sustainability, but even that is relevant to your financial position at the time and doesn't actually cover off on the actual cost to replace or renew infrastructure. So what we're finding is that you end up with roads having more potholes. We've got over 1,000 buildings as a council that we own, so more paint flaking off the buildings and those sorts of things. So it hides exactly what's actually happening out in the real world. So you have all these ratios that says, yes, you are financially sustainable with a neutral outlook, but at the end of the day, the level of service that we can provide to the community, the condition of our infrastructure is deteriorating and everything's going backwards as we speak. The other element, and Mayor touched on this, we've got a new Toowoomba hospital being built and the cost of that is about a $1.3 billion project, but there's no investment into transport around that new hospital. The state is not putting $1 to it, to anything, or very little, I should say. I'll correct myself there. Very little in actual investment into the infrastructure needed to support a new hospital. When we get projects like the Toowoomba Range crossing, which we're very grateful of, this council put in close to $100 million of infrastructure to support that project. With the Inland Rail project coming, we will have to put in or need consequential impacts will be in probably the order of about $200 million over the years ahead. So these are the challenges that through the different funding models, the different developments that are happening at a state and federal level that are putting extreme pressures on councils' financial positions.
But if I could just add one more thing, Chair, if that's okay, around our road network, because it's relevant to the distribution of financial assistance. Our road network is the second longest and growing in Queensland. We've got some 3,400 sealed roads and 3,200 unsealed roads, 161 major structures, including 54 bridges, and around about 660 kilometres of stormwater, 5,225 cross drains, and 577 kilometres of footpaths that connect our region. So, this is a massive asset base. We've got around about $8 billion, as Mo said earlier, an asset base to manage. And as a growing community, that's adding more pressure on those that are living here now and making sure that we can deliver on those livability measures as well.
Thanks, Mayor. I didn't realise you were such a large footprint until it was mentioned earlier. So how far north do you go?
Yeah.
We go as far north as Yarraman, which abuts the South Burnett Regional Council, far south as Cecil Plains, Millmerran area, and out west to the border of Western Downs. So Gundawindi abuts us to the southwest, Southern Downs to the south, Western Downs to the west, and South Burnett to the north, and of course to our eastern suburbs, which include Lockyer Valley Regional Council.
Chair, if I may,
Please.
just one comment in relation to, and it's a little bit of a theme that I tried to kick off in terms of a measure that, or a criteria that federal government could put more focus into in looking at projects and the relevance of projects, and one of those measures is return on investment. And for example, the importance of the Toowoomba Range, the importance of the Inland Rail. But it's that return on investment and that burden on regional councils with that larger area of infrastructure, and everyone, whether it be the media or the man walking down the street, when he thinks in numbers, he thinks in population, and everything goes to headcount. And we get hampered. We don't get the right subsidy because the framework is not there, the thinking is not there, because if you looked at a project, and particularly in regional Australia, just about on any measure, you will get a greater return on your investment than you will on an urbanised project. And if you want to grow our agricultural industry and put those targets out there and doubling it, well then this region is going to be one of those great contributors to the state of Queensland and to this nation, but we need that water security, we need that energy security, and we need that transportation network to deliver, and that will trigger the investment that will deliver that growth.
That's a good point you make, Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Jeff, can I just bring you back to the point you were saying about the funding models? Can you just, for the benefit of Hansard, give an overview of the state funding model, please?
So from a state funding model, Scott, are you referring to how they fund local government?
How they fund your grant programs. And I just want to do a cross-comparative of the federal government assistance grants and roads to recovery and any other competitive funding that might come from us,
sure.
the state government.
That's fine. Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you. So most of the funding would be a 50-50 share, and therefore, from our perspective, it's a real challenge. The other challenge to it is that there seems to be a blend, if you like, a mix or a cocktail of how grant funding is assessed in regard to whether a project is shovel ready, is in a budget, or is out of a budget, and therefore the timing to deliver that is a challenge. So and this is where I talk about financial sustainability. So we need to make sure we're delivering a budget in the parameters, yet some of the, dare I say, some of those items that might align better with state and federal government ideas sometimes don't align with local government ideas of what the need may be for a community. And therefore we wouldn't put those in our budget. However, if a grant round comes up and it's for a specific area, we may have a project in that's 5 years away, and all of a sudden it's the only project that might be eligible. So then we need to scramble to try and adjust our budgets and put something in. Other grants, I said, if it's not in the budget, then you become eligible because it means you can't do it. But ultimately, wherever you get the money from, and this is a concern that I've had for a number of years, wherever you get the money from, if council ends up owning that asset, it becomes a depreciated asset. So therefore, all these things that we add, and we need to keep to an envelope, and our at the moment is around about a $231 million capital spend for this year. We were capped at 200, but we've got a massive project of a $270 million Crestbrook Dam safety upgrade, which I'm sure you all will have heard of. So we've had to extend that out above the 200 million. Okay, so for us, we're at our cap. We can't do that. And therefore, we fit our sustainability measure. However, all of those nice things that the community does need, and they're not just nice, they're essential around parks, footpaths, even some of our road work that we need to do, they're essential. We can't do them. But we still get the sound with a neutral outlook credit rating because we fit within that envelope. So it's a real challenge for us because on one side, we need to fit that and we need to be sustainable financially. On the other side, governments say, well, Toowoomba Regional Council, you're financially stable. Last financial year there was something like 49 out of 77 local governments in Queensland were under financial stress. We're not one of those if you look at the ratings and look at where we sit. But I can tell you that we're not far off it, and we will be if we're not, we're not successful in some of these things. So it was a long answer, Scott, to simply say we're 50-50 funding predominantly. And there needs to be a greater understanding on or alignment of local government priority and state and federal so that we're all aware of what the priorities are for those regions. At the moment, of course, cost of living, housing, it's a given. Water, they're given. But I'm not sure if that's answered your question satisfactorily, has it?
That'll do, Jeff. To your earlier point too, you know how you said 85% rate base, 15 to 20. So let's call that 80-20 just for the sake of numbers. Of the 20% that you attract through capital grants, what percentage of that is state federal?
Yeah, I'll have to take that one on notice, Scott, and we'll get back to you with that. I wouldn't like to just estimate exactly what that is because a lot of the disaster flood recovery funding is shared between state and federal government. So, and there's been a significant amount of that for us over the last 12 months. So that's a fair component of it. And but on an average year, we're about 80-20. Last financial year, we're a bit more than that from a grant perspective, but on an average year, we're 80-20. But we'll get that information too by the end of the month.
That's fine. David from Scenic Rim, would those numbers be
we would get more funding from the federal government than we would from the state government, but then it depends on the funding applications you're putting in. But most of the time, the financial assistance grants tied with roads to recovery at a federal level would be higher than different programs. We've got the sustainability economic stimulus one going through. We've got local government grants and subsidies, both the 60-40 one in that one and the 50-50 one in that one. So similar to what Councillor McDonald's saying, it depends on the ebb and flows of the funding. It's important to try and keep the disaster funding separate because there's timing on that, and we are still behind on that, and there's a lot of catch-up footy you've sort of got to do to get there. But on the whole, yeah, the federal would make up the majority of that 20 you're referring to, Scott.
Yeah. So from my memory, and I just want to go to the competitive grants component. From memory, grants when they go into the market, on average, are 7 times oversubscribed. So when there is $1 million to go out, you work on the assumption that the department will receive $7 million worth of applications. So I can only assume, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the departments, other than the knowledge that I have from when I held portfolio interests, that the barriers to entry, by having shovel-ready projects, etc., the short time frames, are to try and limit those applications to try and... So this is a long-winded way to get around back to you, Jeff. You said that the system was broken, other than just having a bucket of federal government money, all things being equal, if the ratios of 80-20 stay intact. The amount of money required, that's the evidence that we've taken from around the country, between water infrastructure that's ageing, putting aside the argument for CPI on the inflationary costs that you've got that you think that FAGs will address. The cost is going to be colossal and just unachievable. So I want to invite each of the mayors, Tom and Jeff, just to give me an outline as to what you think. You've both identified that that there needs to be something done. What is the preferred model that you would recommend so that we can get that on Hansard for reference?
And just if I can add to that, any final thoughts, just because we're running short on time, we've got the next 2 councils waiting. If the next 2 councils can just make sure they're on mute, please, just so that we can minimise the noise, and we'll be with you shortly. So, yeah, that question that Scott asked, and any final thoughts, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm hoping I'm answering this the right way. Scott, we'd addressed in the opening statement that we're looking for untied capital.
Yep.
How do you get there, is really what you're asking.
So you're asking for the untied capital through the FAGs program?
No, additionally, for project specific.
So just a bucket of money that's there that you go to?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
The untied capital, which means that the councillors are responsible for developing the budget, and they can actually manage the money that comes in to undertake those capital projects that they've selected, gone through a hierarchy process, gone through a community consultation process. We do that with the financial assistance grants at the moment. So an allocation is worked out by the state and federal government. You get input from the likes of Paul Bell and his little group there as well. If we can turn around and say for the next 5 years, we are going to get $15 million per year, hypothetically, for the next 5 years, the councillors turn around and say, that's great, here are the priorities that we are looking at doing. Instead of putting in a funding application that only applies for fixing up a certain type of road or only doing it to do a certain type of sports or recreation, it should be untied. So the councillors at the moment, and I was interested to hear Brisbane, we have one grants officer. That person's job is to write grant applications. I would think Councillor McDonald and Mr Brady would have at least 3 or 4 people working on grants. LGAQ is here today. Peak Services, a subsidiary there, also offer grant writing opportunities. Realistically, if we could just have untied capital to undertake specific works already adopted in the budget, in the long-term financial plan, in the 5-year capital works program, that would give authority to the councillors to roll out those projects based on feedback from the community.
So if the federal government has its FAGs and its roads to recovery
over there,
and then it's got its competitive grants program, you're saying take the competitive grants program, liquidate that, merge it into the untied component of the FAGs program,
yes,
and you'll be able to handle all your capital works requirements into the future.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Correct.
Jeff?
And these are essential programs.
Yeah.
And in terms of accountability and transparency, we've brought, that 5-year program is delivered up front. So instead of this long drawn out, as David alluded to at the front end, the waste in terms of grant application process, then you've got the back end of the acquittal process and the accountability that goes through that actually doesn't
Really good point.
doesn't really achieve anything.
Then you'd be able to repurpose your grant writers because there'd be no more grants.
There would still be the state government grant.
Oh, you could, yes. Yeah.
There's always grants.
There's always grants.
There always-
But,
Je-
but
so-
the acquittal process is even more enduring.
Agreed.
Jeff, could you have a stab at that and sum up, please? We've just got a few more minutes, mate.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. No, very, very quickly, I think credit where credit's due, and a model that does seem to work is the Roads and Community Infrastructure Program, where it does give flexibility to local governments, and I think that's exactly what council needs. We need untied funding that enables us to use the money in our program works that we have for the next 5 years, or 3 to 5 years capital works program, so that we're delivering on that. The days of the 40% water and sewerage subsidy that came through from the state government for projects to support growth, I think we're back to where that should be re-looked at, how that can work, and maybe the feds and the states and territories need to look at how that can work. From our perspective, our assessments look like we need to double the funding that we're getting from the federal government and the state government. We need to double what we're getting. That's the assessment we've done. Not only to do what we're doing now and in the future, but the backlog. There's a backlog of work. We're at an infrastructure cliff, and we're on it right now, peering over the edge. That's the issue for us. We've got 2 massive projects, Inland Rail and the Crestbrook Dam safety upgrades. Crestbrook Dam safety upgrade, we've had no commitment of funding from either federal or state. Federal was a disaster ready funding application for $20 million, and of course that was well oversubscribed, so we were out of the running. But if there was ever a disaster ready program or project, that's it, saving lives down the road through to Toogoolawah and wiping the town out. So it's beyond me how we possibly couldn't even be considered. So that's an issue for us. In the Inland Rail, passenger rail from Toowoomba to Brisbane, massive project. These are nation-building projects, but that Toowoomba to Brisbane will not happen without the Inland Rail Melbourne to the Port of Brisbane, because you need the tunnel to go through the mountains. So big things ahead. But I just want to thank you very much, Chair, to you and the panel. As I say, 20 years in the making, but we very much appreciate the opportunity to contribute.
Good on you, Mayor, and you've certainly both represented your constituencies very well today. I gave you a bit of extra time because the evidence was good, and appreciate you being with us today. What we'll do, because Mayor Sharp, you had an additional document there?
I'll skip on it.
So what we'll do is, because it's the wish of the committee that some additional submission be accepted into our inquiry and authorised for publication. There being no objection, it is so ordered. Beauty, thanks very much. If there's any additional information that we asked for, we had some information there about the breakdown of your revenue. That's handy. Please get any additional info into the Secretariat by the end of the month. Again, really appreciate your time. We'll send you a transcript from today, and if there's been any corrections needed, then please get them through to us, and we'll make sure that occurs. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you, councillors, on
Chair.
both online and in person. And Jeffrey, just for your benefit, in the gallery here today are a number of Scenic Rim local councillors who have given up their morning to come and participate. I just want to acknowledge you guys as well, and thank you for the time that and the respect you've shown to the committee process. And I concur with the Chair's comments about the quality of the evidence given here today. It does offer, and I think as a sign of respect, we'll go back to the department and ask them just to model some numbers on if the competitive grants bucket was dissolved and divided through 550 councils, what would that difference look like? Just for an exercise, there's no commitment to it other than
We'll certainly
asking the question.
we'll certainly have that conversation about it with our other committee members as well, just so that they can have the advantage of this discussion, whilst we enjoy the advantage of being in this beautiful place. Oh, I'm sure they're listening. All right, thanks very much, gentlemen, and also want to extend thanks to North Burnett Regional Council and Banana Shire Council, I think, are on the line. Are they on the line or some here in person?
Yeah, Tom Upton online.
G'day, Tom and Craig. Are you there, Craig? Yeah, you can. Is that you, Craig? As soon as we've got Banana Shire Council on the line, we'll get cracking. Oh, sorry, we're waiting for Mr. Burnett. Sorry, North Burnett's Mr. Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, the call dropped out there just for a moment. So my apologies.
You're right. You're right. No worries at all.
Thank you. Thank you. My name's Craig Matheson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the North Burnett Regional Council, and I appreciate the opportunity that the committee has afforded our council to be part of your deliberations today.
Good on you, and thanks very much for joining us, and apologies we went a little bit into your time. We'll give you a little bit more time at the end, but in a minute I'll just ask for an opening statement, and that's really the opportunity to get all your main points out that you want our committee to take on board. But before we do that, I just need to do a bit of housekeeping. Earlier today we've acknowledged the traditional custodians. We've also let people know that we've resolved that this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and that the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry's website. There are some people here in the gallery here in Beaudesert, and we just advise everyone that filming and recording are permitted during the hearing, but also always remind members of the media of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. My name's Luke Gosling. I'm the federal member for Darwin and Palmerston in the Northern Territory, seat called Solomon, and have some additional responsibilities in Defence Veterans and Northern Australia. And with me is our host local member, Scotty Buchholz.
The Honourable Scotty Buchholz. Hello, Thomas.
There you go, Scott.
Good. Thomas has got probably, 40 years experience in local government?
30, Scott, but they're passing quickly, mate.
Yep. And is a just so to declare, Tommy and I went to school together.
Conflict of interest.
Conflict of it. No, not at all. This bloke's one of the most experienced CEOs.
No, beauty. Really look forward to your evidence. And just, I know you've already introduced yourselves, but just for the Hansard record, starting with North Burnett, if you can please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee.
Thank you. It's Craig Matheson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the North Burnett Regional Council, and I'm appearing before the committee on behalf of the council.
Thanks, Craig.
And it's Tom Upton, Chief Executive Officer of Banana Shire Council, and I'm appearing in front of the committee on behalf of council.
Lovely.
Fantastic. Best named council in the country. Although the committee does not require you to give, apart from Darwin City Council, but although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective Houses of Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard, who are here in the room with us, and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you both to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion. And just because we've got two CEOs on the phone, if just before you speak, if you could just remind us whether it's Craig or where's my note gone? Or Thomas, sorry. Yeah, whether it's Craig or Thomas. But we will start with North Burnett Regional Council with an opening statement, please.
Thank you. And through the chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity for us to participate with you in your deliberations today. I'm very fortunate and privileged to have had the experience of having spent 35 years either working in or having had responsibility for the local government system in Queensland. And over that time, what I've been able to do is bear witness to, I guess, the extent of the escalating challenges that councils face on a day-to-day basis and indeed on a year-to-year basis in terms of servicing the needs of their communities and responding to those needs as they continue to change and evolve. I guess what's very clear to me and indeed to our council is that the financial assistance and funding system that currently is in place for local governments across the federation is well past its use by date. I think the LJQ in its submission has made representation that the system is broken, and we would endorse that commentary and believe that it needs a fundamental rethink. Not least of which in the Queensland context is that effectively 48 of the 77 councils in Queensland are facing significant sustainability challenges. The North Burnett Council, which I represent, is one of those 48 councils. And hence there's a compelling need for change. And I guess for myself and for the other councils like us, what we're looking for and hoping to see as a result of the committee's deliberations is the prospect of some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of seeing a fairer funding model put in place for local governments. We've certainly seen Commonwealth and state taxation revenues grow considerably over the last 20 years. We've not seen that same level of escalation in terms of revenue for local government, unfortunately. The reality is rating is the only real direct revenue raising tool that smaller councils like ours has at its disposal. It's perhaps probably the most visible in terms of taxation measures within the community. And unlike larger councils, larger urbanised councils, we don't have commercial or income producing assets, and we don't have and if we did, we don't have the financial capacity to invest in those. So for the survival of our councils, and indeed at the end of the day, it is about the survival of our communities, and we shouldn't lose sight of that aspect. There is a need to approach there is a need for a fresh approach to the financial platform for the local government system. So we do see that fair share of revenue generation, which the Commonwealth is well placed to levy and generate. Because at the end of the day, it is about servicing the needs of the same end user. It is the same constituents that federal, state and local governments all seek to service at the end of the day. So we're very optimistic and hopeful we'll see some groundbreaking recommendations emerge from the committee's inquiry. Thank you for that.
Thanks very much, Craig. And Thomas?
Yep, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Look, just from Banana Shire Council perspective, I think in many respects we will face the same challenges that North Burnett does, so I won't repeat the issues that Craig has already raised, but I will say I'll identify 4 key areas that we find as a challenge in terms of both council and our community being sustainable. The first one is remote workers. So one of our key challenges is FIFO and DIDO arrangements. The challenge with remote workers is that we lose population as families move to alternate locations. We have the issue there. Key issue there is we have fewer customers in many respects to fund the cost of core services. but there's also a supplementary impact as population decreases or as we lose population. We have challenges in terms of maintaining services such as health, education, retail, and even entertainment activities, because there just isn't critical mass in some of these communities to go down that path. So it's important that there is some capacity for us to invest not only in opportunity but also invest in livability assets to make our communities more attractive, to try and stem that flow of people moving from local where they're working to the coast. In terms of funding arrangements, yes, can I just echo from my perspective, the FAGS grant is a critical element of council's funding mix. It generally floats around 10 to 15% of Banana Shire's total income, and it is critical for us in terms of having that underlying funding opportunity there to where council can apply local priorities to how that funding is expended. If I could say, probably the untied grants are far more important to us because we're locked in with the competitive grants to specific priorities that not always, they do often, but not always reflect the priorities of the community. If we can get those FAGS grants back up to 1% of Commonwealth revenues, it provides a very, very sound base to supplement our rate income. In many respects, the untied grants, from a council perspective, is the difference for us being free men to being serfs in some respects. Because what we have is, with the untied grants, is we have the capacity to allocate those funds to meet local funding priorities. The other thing that I wanted to raise was accounting treatments in many respects. The way that it's an issue I have with state government rather than the federal government, but the application of the sustainability criteria, I think, is flawed at a state government level. My view is that the accounting treatment that the department applies to the sustainability arrangements necessitates the split between capital and operating revenues. The Australian accounting standard does not require revenues to be split along those lines, and I think that you would address a lot of sustainability issues if we simply followed the accounting standards in determining the income and expenditures of councils. Depreciation is another issue that is a challenge for us in terms of, again, it's the basis of calculations. It's almost like we have the accounting standards that we apply, and then at a bureaucratic level at state government, we apply another level of pain in terms of determining what we are, whether we're sustainable or not as a local government. The critical thing for me is the challenge of providing services to small communities.
Yeah.
And as governments often talk about equity in various forms, surely the most fundamental form of equity is that residents in small communities have equivalent access to services as those residents in larger communities for around the same cost. That's my opening statement, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks very much, Thomas. And Craig made the same point about regional development, and I guess that's why this committee was keen to take on this inquiry topic, because we understand how important local government is to developing our regions. If they're going to grow, if we're going to be able to have them as productive and growing parts of our country, which is what we want, then local government's a big part of that. And we've heard other evidence too about the effect of FIFO work and DIDO work on communities. So acknowledge all of that, and acknowledge that local government is a good employer in regional Australia, but it can't always obviously compete with obviously people want to provide for their families, so look at sort of how they can best do that, and often there is there's a lot of competition for their labour, L-A-B-O-U-R, because the mining industries and other industries pay pretty good wages to people. So yeah, just wanted to say we acknowledge that there's that tension there, and just invite you all to give any particular emphasis on the issue of defining financial sustainability, but then if you just want to reflect on any further, before I hand to Scott, just reflect on any recommendations specifically around the distribution to get that equity. With all your long experience in local government, we'd really appreciate any thoughts you had on distribution, because there's two things. One is a greater quantum of federal assistance grants, and we've heard that message obviously loud and clear around the country, but then there's always a finite amount, and then it becomes an issue of distribution in order to achieve that equity. So appreciate any thoughts from the both of you, but we'll start with Craig on definitions of financial sustainability and thoughts on distribution.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly from our council's perspective, and certainly from my observations over the years, financial sustainability really effectively has two aspects to it. One is very much the direct financial component, so the ability to raise sufficient revenue to deliver operations and to continue to maintain investment in assets on an ongoing basis. The second limb to it really, and this is something we've incorporated into our work, is really around service sustainability. So the ability of, the efficiency and the ability of our services to continue to be responsive to community needs, where there is a demonstrable need for those communities. I'm conscious that we're all very conscious that there's often a community want or a community desire, but there's not necessarily a compelling need. So it's about making sure you've got a well-defined service catalogue that is supported and enabled to deliver on a continuing basis in a way that is responsive to community needs. So there's very much those two facets to sustainability that we adopt here in our council.
Thank you, Craig. Thomas, any reflections there?
Yeah, I'd probably add a third dimension to sustainability, which is population maintenance in many respects. I think that one of the challenges, particularly for small communities in Queensland, the need to maintain population in terms of retaining services provided by other levels of government is critical in terms of assisting us to continue to be sustainable. I'll just go back to the financial elements for 2 seconds.
Yep.
I think it would be useful for the committee to go through the councils that are presently facing presently unsustainable or had a high risk of unsustainability, and just compare their cash position to their accounting position. In many respects, you will find that a lot of those councils are actually cash flow positive. It is accounting treatments and the methods that we've applied to determine whether they're sustainable or not that actually, in some respect, makes them unsustainable. So it is worth just going back and seeing how many cash flow positive councils are actually at risk of are recorded as being at risk of high risk of financial sustainability, where it is accounting treatments and asset valuations methodologies that are a challenge for you.
Is that the depreciation
if I could just add,
methodology?
if I may add, Chair, that I would wholeheartedly endorse Tom's comments there as well, and we're very much North Burnett very much one of those councils. In fact, we've just signed off our financial statements yesterday. But the metrics around sustainability are indeed an area that does, and I know that's not the Commonwealth issue, that's very much the state's issue. But certainly, and Tom did mention this earlier around depreciation, there are very real present challenges now in terms of how depreciation is required to be accounted for and treated, and the way in which it's applied in a uniform way to assets where it's clearly not appropriate to apply in that same way.
Do you reckon that's an inhibitor for smaller shires that may not pursue competitive grant programs because the forecasted depreciation costs into the future would potentially make the councils unsustainable?
It is part of what we should be considering as part of the whole of life cost of an asset. We should consider the whole of life cost of an asset before we apply for a grant, and it is a factor in my view. And I think it's more pronounced the smaller you get as a council, Scott. So the larger you are, the less impact individual projects have. But at a small council, it becomes very highlighted where on a per project basis.
So, guys,
if I may add there through the chair, in terms of the direct question around reticence around pursuing competitive grants, I think certainly the ongoing responsibility for assets and assets created and depreciating those are certainly one aspect comes into the equation there that influences our decisions, and there are very real examples which I can cite for us. Other things that influence our decisions on whether or not to apply for those grants are a big challenge for us is the percentage contribution required by councils. In the main, in many instances, it's usually a 50-50 contribution, which places that pretty much beyond the realms of attainment for councils like our own, which still has to maintain its core capital works program. And the other thing is timing. We're often given very little notice or no notice, very short time to turn around applications. If there's one single thing that the late payment of the financial assistance grants this year should be ringing alarm bells to every level of government, is the criticality of providing greater levels of certainty into the financial and funding system that applies to local government. Now, I know that's the federal government's responsibility this year. It was a deliberate decision by the state government, but certainty is critical in terms of councils being able to successfully plan for the future in relation to the financial resources they have at their disposal.
Thanks. We've got that message loud and clear about the certainty around timing. Scott, did you have any other questions?
I do. And my question just goes to, I'm interested in your opinion. This morning we had Brisbane City Council and the City of Logan give evidence. Enormous councils, followed by Cynic Rim and Toowoomba. You guys have got, between Burnett and Banana, 30, 40 years apiece of experience. So I'm just going to ask you guys a different type of question, and which seems to be an evidence flow coming out of the conversations that we've had right across the country. So from a grant perspective, most councils are saying that feds are probably around that 80% of their income, and the state component is about 20%. The other thing that they're making a point about is the cost shifting. and those numbers are basically mirror inverted, where it's 80% of the cost shifting is coming from the state and 20% is coming from the feds, and that 20% was when they handed back airports and some other peripheral things. So the creeping acquisition of cost shifting is alive and well within the state, is coming from the state pressure. My question to you, both Craig and Tom, is if in your request for additional FAGS money to that 1%, why would you be asking for it to be untied when the reality is that the creeping acquisition of the state government, that whatever money that may be forthcoming from the federal government, there'll just be another cost push from the state to absorb that? Why wouldn't you have, and I note that I've got LGAQ in the gallery here today, so it's a question that you guys can also just take on in the event that there's further evidence you can give in the future. But why wouldn't you, given the evidence, be asking for an increase in FAGS that is tied to infrastructure to try and inoculate yourself from this cost shift, this continual cost shift from the state government? Can I start with you, Craig?
Certainly through the chair, and thank you very much for the question. I think it would be fair to say that the reality is that the quest for greater certainty and a fairer share of the funding pool is both to meet the demands associated with the operational delivery of council services as well as infrastructure. I'm certainly not averse to the notion of an additional component being an untied grant, but tied to the delivery of infrastructure. So in essence, almost a federal version of something like Works for Queensland, which is delivered by the state government. But I guess the word of caution I would found is, and I did catch the very end of the hearing with Toowoomba and I think it was Scenic Rim. Pardon me if I've got that wrong. It's not simply a case, in my view, of amalgamating all competitive grant programs and saying, well, that's the bucket of money for infrastructure, and we'll deliver it on that basis, because I suspect you will probably still find, and in fact you may actually exacerbate some of the infrastructure funding need that is not being met when that funding is distributed.
I absolutely agree.
So, Scott, if I could just add to Craig's comments, just one of the challenges that we face, and it gets more, I think it gets harder the smaller the community that you're talking about and the smaller the resources that are available, is that the federal government-tied competitive grant programs are amongst the most administrative resource heavy that you can get.
Indeed.
Say that again, Tom. I just didn't quite.
The competitive grants.
So the Commonwealth funding programs that are tied programs are among the most administrative resource heavy applications that are out there to access them. So the smaller, like I don't employ a grants officer, Scott. I know some of the larger councils do, but so what I've got to do is I've got to find staff who are already doing their job, but they've got to find extra time to do that work. And the smaller the council gets, so as you go to the remote councils, the less capacity they have to compete effectively for those competitive grants. That's why the increase in the federal assistance grant is of a greater benefit to smaller councils than additional competitive grants, because what you're doing is you're relieving them of the administrative burden of going through that process to secure grants.
That's understood. And just for the record, that was Thomas, yeah?
Yes, that's correct, yes. Tom, Mr Chair, if you like.
Tom. No, thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
So just getting your voices mixed up there, but that's great. Just let us know. Scotty's going to have one question, and then we're going to ask for any final thoughts.
So there was evidence we received from South Australia, from a council, that when we said to them, if you had extra funding, what would you do with it? And he said, the first thing I'd do would be to put on a grant writer to ask for more funding. Is that your opinion as well, Tom?
Scott, I think that no, if I had more funding, I've got enough challenges in terms of infrastructure that I don't need more administrative officers. I need more bitumen on roads, or more work on roads, and more work on my water and sewage assets. That's where I would prioritise funding for infrastructure. I wouldn't add bodies to my team.
I really appreciate both of the councils today giving evidence, and particularly because of the size of both of you. I think both of your shires rely more heavily than most on your workforce being able to multitask, because there are those challenges on your workforce requirements. So compliment both of you, and I thank you for your submissions today, and I'll hand back to the Chair.
Thanks, gentlemen, and we started a little bit late, so happy for you to make any final sort of summing up comments. If you did want to, we've already talked about workforce a little bit and some of the challenges there for the smaller councils, smaller not in geography, but smaller in terms of population and human resource on your staff, and that point is taken about the time resource intensity of the grant processes with no certainty. So yeah, just an opportunity to sum up. If we can go to you first, Craig, and then to Thomas. Any final points, please?
Thank you, Chair. Look, in conclusion, I would echo the comment that in response to the last question that which is posed, that Tom responded to. Were our council to achieve a fairer share as a result of a reconsideration of the distribution of funding to of taxation review to local governments, our priority clearly would first and foremost would be about investing in a backlog of maintenance in terms of roads and other community assets, and the delivery of core services. That is a challenge that is faced by councils like us across the board, that generally have a fairly aged cohort in terms of asset base. We have our communities rely on those assets. They are part and parcel of both the economic and the social fabric of those communities. They need those assets and those facilities and those services in order to survive. And that's why I made the comment right at the outset about, at the end of the day, regardless of where the funding's generated, it's all actually servicing the same constituency. And so I'd really encourage the committee to bear that in mind when it's working through its evidence and it's framing its deliberations, that at the end of the day, the ability to levy the revenue that then cascades down to local government, the greater levers for that do reside with the federal government. And at the end of the day, by providing that greater level of funding and that greater certainty of funding through to councils, is servicing the same constituents that they represent.
Thank you very much. And Tom, bring it home,
Mr.
Tom.
Chair, look, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Look, I just all I'll say is, I reflect on, confirm Craig's points, but just you've probably heard it to death, but just those untied grants are far more valuable to us than the competitive grants. Just a couple of the other issues that I'm sure you're already aware of it, but things like housing stock availability are a serious problem in regional communities as well. Not just because of the cost of building, but it is the amount of housing stock that is available. So that is a challenge for councils, and workforce is a challenge. But I'm sure the workforce is a challenge everywhere. So we're doing our best there, and I'm sure that there's more to be done in that space. But thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's a pleasure, and thank you.
Thanks very much to both of you, and as Scott said, Tom, appreciate the benefit of your many decades in local government. We do understand workforce is a difficulty everywhere. As an aside, the federal government's looking at the definition of regionality because it's kind of not working for regional Australia and our need to attract workforce, but we also need to grow our own and grow populations. And so it's been some great evidence today, and we really appreciate your time. Anything additional that you wanted to provide to the Secretariat, please do that by the end of October, by the end of this month. We'll send you a copy of the transcript from your evidence, so you've got an opportunity to read through it. And we're certainly very happy to make any corrections if there has been a problem with transcription. Sometimes when there's a lot of people on the phone, you sort of get it. There can be a difficulty in attributing correctly comments, but there are also obviously a lot of areas in which there's agreement for like councils, because you've got like challenges that we endeavour to help you with through this committee's work in the report. So thanks again, and have a good day.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Chair, and
guys.
thank you to your committee.
Yeah.
Good to speak to you.
Can I call the representatives of the Western Queensland Alliance of Councils, but also note we've got Southwestern, so Southwestern, Northwestern, Central Western Queensland representatives. We've got some on the phone, we've got some in person, we've got a bevy of mayors and executive directors and CEOs. Is there a collective noun for mayors? I'm sure it's complimentary, whatever it is, but I'm not sure. To accept that as next question. All right, can we just get a roll call of who's currently online, please? Have we got Mayor Barry?
Barry Hughes?
Yeah, Barry Hughes. Barry online? Have we got Mayor Janine Fegan online on the phone?
Yes, I'm present. Janine Fegan here.
Thanks, Mayor. Have we got CEO David Arnold on the call?
Yeah, I'm here, Chair.
Thanks, David. So we might just wait on, because there's a bit of housekeeping I need to do before we kick off, so we might just wait to see if Mayor Barry Hughes is about. In person here, we've got Mayor Sam O'Toole. G'day, Mayor.
Thank you.
Executive, and your executive officer, is it, Simone?
Yeah, that's right,
yes.
Simone Talbot.
Oh, yeah, I can read that thing there, yeah. And Greg, thanks for joining us, Greg. And that's everyone. Sorry, was that Mayor Barry Hughes?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, got you now. Thanks, Mayor. Great, we've got everyone. So, yep, yeah, she's on the phone. Yep, beautiful. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have previously, as a committee, resolved that this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of the proceedings, including your evidence, will be published on the inquiry's website. And we just advise that filming and recording is permitted, and remind members of the media to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. My name's Luke Gosling. I'm the federal member for Solomon, which is Darwin and Palmerston in the Northern Territory. It's great to be part in this. Great to be here in this beautiful part of Queensland with the local member, as it turns out. That's your cue, Dean.
Honourable Scotty Buchholz, federal member for the seat of Wright, and can I welcome those councillors that are joining us both online, but more importantly those that have travelled to Beaudesert, and welcome Mayor Samantha O'Toole, your CEO Simone Talbot, and Greg Hoffman, who brings an enormous amount of comprehension and understanding of all things local government to this inquiry. We are really appreciative of the submissions that we've received from you. Barry Hughes on the line. We were up in Cairns yesterday and we received evidence from, is it Darley? Who's your CEO up there for your rock? No.
G'day, Scott. Darlene, and I got the photos. Thanks very much.
Oh, good. Well, welcome everyone. We look forward to your evidence today. Chair?
All right. Let's rock and roll.
Yep.
See what I did there? This is the last session. We're looking forward to it. Is it Simone or Simone?
I'll answer to both.
No worries. Fantastic. We need to, for the Hansard record, and just bear with us, we need you to state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee. We'll just go left to right, starting with Greg.
Greg Hoffman. I'm the Executive Officer of the North West Queensland Regional Organisation of Councils.
Simone Talbot. I'm the Executive Officer for the South West Queensland Regional Organisation of Councils.
Samantha O'Toole, Mayor Blanchard, the South West Regional Organisation of Councils Chair, and on the leadership group for the Western Queensland Alliance of Councils.
Thank you. And Mayor Barry.
Barry Hughes, Mayor of Etheridge Shire and Chair of North West Rock River Councils.
Thank you. Mayor Janine.
Mayor of McKinley Shire and Treasurer of the North West Rock.
And David.
Yeah, David Arnold, CEO of the Central West Queensland Remote Area Planning and Development Board.
Thank you all. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses of federal Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard, that's here in the room with us, and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement, just in whoever's going to speak on behalf of your particular rock, but we'll start with Southwest, go to Northwest, and then go to Central West.
Chair, to simplify it, I'm going to do an opening statement on behalf of all three of us, if that's
fantastic.
Amicable to the hearing.
All right. This next bit, though, is going to be really important. Just to assist us with transcription and making sure we put the right comments to the right people, for those on the phone, just before you speak, just say it's... Introduce yourself. Just give us your name and then we'll make sure we get it all right. But thanks very much, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee, and we represent the 24 councils that form the Western Queensland Alliance, known as WAC. To state the obvious, the inquiry is utmost important to the future performance of the local government sector and critically the future livability of communities, especially those west of the Great Divide that produce significant wealth for the redistribution of governments across our nation. Given the time restraints, I won't re-prosecute our entire submission or the particular structural barriers and stressors that regional and remote councils face compared to our urban counterparts. These are comprehensively outlined in our WAC submission. Rather, I'd like to highlight the key actions that the Australian Government can implement to achieve strong, adaptable and resilient councils and communities and regions. Our priorities are to eliminate the annual prepayment of the federal assistance grant and support these grants being paid upfront and in full at the beginning of each financial year to assist small local governments with limited financial resources. Our second, whilst we support the ALGA and LGAQ's call to increase the overall quantum of funding to councils, in the short term we would encourage a focus on improved horizontal fiscal equalisation by reviewing the minimum grant provided to the general purpose grant funding pool, essentially redistributing funding more equitably to councils that need the funds to ensure that every community can receive a similar level of service. As you will note on page 43 of our submission, small regional, rural and remote councils are often the providers of last resort. In summary, we are increasingly expected to do more with less. Our third priority is a redesign of the grant programs, moving away from competitive approaches with matching funding to allocative approaches with tiered funding contributions, recognizing the financial limitations on small regional, rural and remote councils. Number 4 is councils will be the powerhouse of Australia's energy transition. Our WAC region alone generates $16.27 billion in gross regional product. That is $284,000 per head, 3.4 times more than the rest of our state. If Australia is to meet its net zero targets, returning a great portion of this revenue to the regions that generates it will be the most important through funding of key essential infrastructures like road, airport, water and digital infrastructure. Our fourth priority is the implementation and enhancement of income tax incentives for individuals residing and working in remote communities to counterbalance the elevated cost of living and make them more attractive places to live and work. And our fifth is to ensure the environmental regulations and control measures are accompanied by adequate funding support for WAC councils, as changing rules and regulations without additional financial resources play undue strain on local government and hinder our ability to effectively manage environmental challenges. In conclusion, to borrow from a well-known phrase, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Given the issue of local government sustainability, it's a systemic one. We would argue that we have been stuck in the cycle for far too long. This inquiry, if bold enough, can be the catalyst for a wholesale change, and it has never been more important. As Australia enters a new era of geopolitical instability, climate chaos, energy transition, strong councils that are capably partnered with the state and federal governments will be critical to Australia's global standing and future sustainability and prosperity. So we look forward to hearing the committee's draft report in due course and seeing how bold you can be. And on behalf of the 24 councils of Western Queensland, I thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks very much, Sam. And can I just, we were given at the start by Greg a very handy summary of the Western Queensland Alliance of Councils, so I congratulate you for putting that together, because very handy map to see the enormity of the area that the ROC Alliance represents, and we will accept that as an exhibit to the inquiry. There being no objections, it's so ordered.
So be it.
Thanks very much. It's a big bit of land, as I said, and I think as Mr. Buchholz just mentioned, a lot of these, was it 28?
24.
24 council areas would have relatively small staff compared to some of our earlier witnesses that gave evidence about some of the big growth areas down here. What we want is growth in regional Australia. Local government's a big part of making that happen. Thanks for your very comprehensive submission. But we just want to give everyone a chance to give us some feedback and go to the main points that you want us to take away from your patch, whether it be central, southwest, northwest. So I want to make sure we get to do that because we've got a bit of a hard finish in a little while. So really appreciate Mayor O'Toole that opening statement. Can I just go to, because you're from Southwest,
That's
you're
correct.
speaking on behalf of everyone.
Yeah.
Can I just go to Barry? Barry in the northwest, just if you or some of your colleagues there wanted to speak from a northern perspective for a minute or two.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Barry Hughes. Look, due to time constraints, I think I'll just refer back to the executive summary.
Yep.
And there's a number of issues that have been raised there that are very pertinent across the north and the northwest. The substantial decline in population over the past decade, the reliance on external funding, the funding methodologies for capital projects only, not for maintenance and repair, and it's a very comprehensive document that outlines the shortfall across the relationship between the federal government and northwest or remote councils. And I've had the ability to listen in this morning and hear some of our colleagues talk about Works for Queensland type of grant programs from the Fed, surplus to the state contributions that we already get. The 80-20 to 50-50 funding arrangement is tightening the noose around remote and rural councils. And the continuity around the financial assistance grants being delivered in a timely manner. And I guess my position, Chair, would be to call on the federal government to be brave and innovative to address the inadequacies outlined in the discussions that we hold today, because these rural and remote councils are withering on the vine, and if we don't get some form of refocusing by the federal government to address what we speak about here today and what is written quite comprehensively in the executive summary, then we are going to see the sustainability indeed continue to wane. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Points well made. And in the interest of fairness, I just want to make sure we've got a representative from a central Western Rock. So, David, if I can ask you if there's any other additional points you wanted to make before we continue on.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. To try and not duplicate Barry and what I heard prior to this, look, I will focus on the fact that financial sustainability is one thing, but also livability for our local governments is closely tied to financial sustainability. If we don't have livability out here across such areas as childcare, healthcare, housing, then, to use Barry's words, we start to wither on the vine. I'd probably again to focus on Australia's energy transition. From my observation, irrespective of who's in government, we appear to be in a global era of energy transition. And I think we have the capacity out here in the Western Queensland Alliance to be at the forefront of that energy transmission. That will also require, whether we want to economically or forced to, that is going to require significant support in infrastructure projects for those emerging industries, such as the renewables and the carbon farming sector. From an environmental perspective, we need those dedicated funding streams to support environmentally sustainable practices. Again, I'll focus here on to reduce the carbon emissions, promote renewable energy, enhance waste management. And I think all those things aren't just a straight out ask for money. We are, as Samantha O'Toole pointed out, from a gross regional product perspective, we produce well above our weight here. And I think if we're going to keep producing out here and return income, that is better for the federal government, is to return that income, pay our fair share of income tax, and that all goes around in a bucket. So I would think that I'll leave my comments on that, Chair, which I'm hoping is not duplicated what I've heard in the past and now. I'll leave it at that.
Are you calling from Longridge, Dave?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Who was that? Scott, was it?
Yeah. Just so I can
Yeah,
see.
no, I'm in Longridge.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. Scott, questions?
So today we've taken evidence from enormous show, Brisbane and Logan, and their budget pressures are far different to the pressures that your smaller shires have. I want to ask you, Sam, about do you have a preferred funding methodology? I know the LGAQ have a flat line approach where if there was to be an appropriation of additional funds through a percentage base, that it would just go across all of the locations on a percentage base, meaning that the bulk of the money ends up in the capital cities.
Yeah.
When we've taken evidence from Western Australia, South Australia, each of those provinces have lent more towards an argument that there's better value in smaller regional areas, and they put forward a need. Previously, federal governments have tried to accommodate that through differing methodologies. You'll remember in the FAGS program there was a freezing of the CPI process, which was a $350 million cost saving, and then a number of weeks later there was an announcement for $350 million for the National Bridge Renewal Program, which was a way of getting more money into the regions. Can I just ask, and Sam, if you're speaking on behalf of the group or anyone that wants to make a contribution, do you have alternative funding methodologies if there were to be any increases considered?
Well, in our funding submission, we have, I suppose in line with LGAQ, put the increase to the federal assistance grants. But in my opening comments, I suppose, to me, if the federal government wasn't able to increase the bucket, this has been the call for local government for years, is to increase from the 1%, hasn't it? I don't know how feasible that is. So I suppose our point of differentiation today was to say the minimum grant should be reconsidered then. Because if the government doesn't want to grow the bucket to distribute it across local councils, maybe we should consider how it is distributed within the bucket. And so a redistribution would allow, of the minimum grant, would allow those rural and remote councils to receive a greater proportion. We haven't in our submission put a specific number about what the redistribution should be, but we have got some figures Hoffy's done. I might hand over to Hoffy to elaborate on them. But I suppose similar to how Queensland Grants Commission recently did a redistribution within our state to consider rural and remote councils and how they're significantly disadvantaged in the, and have very unique challenges. It did see an uplift for many of the rural and remote councils. The federal government could do something similar if they didn't want to increase the bucket. So, like everyone, we've been talking about a 1% increase for decades.
Yep.
Whether that's reasonable or not is in your hands, not ours. And I suppose we've given you a second option.
Just for the record, if it's helpful, I think the LGA mob,
LGAQ
as a member of the national one, have been talking about an increase to 1%,
Yeah,
to increase
to
to 1%,
2%,
not an increase of 1%. But I guess regardless of whether there is an increase to the quantum, there's still this issue of distribution.
Right.
And you made that point well, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, if it's possible, I just would like to hand to Greg Hoffman. Hoffy just yesterday did some stats about what that possibly could look like.
Great, thanks, Greg.
In Queensland, there are currently 15 councils on minimum grant. That number has increased from 11 in the previous 12 months.
11 to 15. What was? I didn't quite hear you.
The number of councils who are on the minimum grant has increased from 11 to 15. Those 15 councils in the last allocation received $117 million from the general purpose grant pool, which at total is $466 million. This is Queensland figures. So, you know, that's roughly that 30% that they are entitled to. Whilst we haven't put a specific figure, that's a question for government to consider, but if it was to be reduced from 30% to, say, 20%, then that would generate $38 million that would be available for distribution within the body of councils, the 77 councils in total. If it was reduced from 30 to 15%, that would be $58.5 million. Now, the debate that occurred when the Queensland Local Government Grants Commission made its adjustments to its methodology, which has been transitioned over the last 3 years, understandably is a loss of revenue is not going to be well received by anybody.
No.
But the point that's been able to be made is that in the percentage terms in regard to their total revenue raising and their capacity to raise alternative funding, then it's a very small percentage that they lose, but a very significant gain to the rural remote councils by way of a percentage increase for them. And that's the benefit that loss for some can provide for others, which, based on your point of view, is a small loss for a significant gain into the rural remotes. And I might add that even if the pool was increased, which would benefit everybody to a degree, that accompanied with a change to the minimum grant arrangements would see more of that increase find its way to the rural remotes. And in fact, you know, the argument we put is that our challenges around sustainability are far more significant than those larger councils that have got the capacity to raise far more revenue, self-sourced funding than rural remote councils will ever do.
Just for the benefit of Hansard, Greg, if when federal government appropriate the FAG's contribution to the Queensland government, whose methodology is used? Is it the federal government or the Queensland grants methodology for distribution? Can you just draw an organisational chart or a mind map of how that rolls through?
There are national principles that are involved in guidance or direction to the local government grants commissions at state and territory level. So it's the requirement of the state and territory grants commissions to develop their methodologies in line with the national principles. Obviously, there are flexibilities within that as to how the individual commissions approach it. Our commission has responded to representations from all councils when they contemplated or proposed the change of methodology to look at where the particular challenges were. And you know, the fundamental proposition was that we should distribute the funds to where they have the greatest value in terms of achieving the horizontal equalisation and meeting the service demands of rural remote, well, all communities, but as our submission points out, particularly on page 43, we look to the circumstances where the councils in rural remote areas are the providers of last resort. The services that are readily available through either government sources or private sector sources in many of the, well, in metropolitan areas and larger regional and coastal cities do not exist, are not available in rural remote communities unless the councils provide them. And to ensure that everyone has fair and equitable access to services, that's where we argue the federal government can provide its best assistance through the FAGS funding.
With those flexibilities that you mentioned that each state by state may have with that appropriation, do you have a line of sight or an opinion on, is there a state that, by exercising that flexibility, that does it better than most? Is there a best practice state appropriation, or is that not something that...
I'm not familiar with the details of all of them, but being closely involved with the review that the Queensland Commission commenced 3 years ago and has now completed the transitional funding, we have to indicate our support for that, because everyone was asked to make their pitches as to how the methodology could be changed, and we are well pleased with how the Queensland Commission approached that, because they legitimately acknowledged the service, the need for service equality, and the only way that was going to be achieved at the rural remote level through the funding that they had at their disposal was the methodology change that they introduced, which did involve an adjustment to what constitutes a minimum grant council, as well as other elements of the assessment of need and the allocation of funding to meet that need. They well demonstrate that full horizontal equalisation to everybody needs a large increase in the total pool. But within the pool as it currently is, they have been able to make adjustments to the weightings and the distribution arrangements that support the rural remote councils in a way that has been very well received.
Could you just, or anyone, Sam, or just for the benefit of the chair, we've heard that from councils who have got an 80% rate base, 20% grant. Can you just share what with these smaller councils, what that split may look like?
Well, I can give you my example. So Boulogne has a on-source revenue of about 15% of our overall income as a council, and I would think across the Western Queensland Alliance of Councils that would be one of the larger ratios, possibly with the exception of Maranoa and Mount Isa that we represent.
And the smaller ones, just to...
Some of them would be as low as 5%, I believe.
5% rate space?
Yes.
And then 95% grants?
Yeah.
Yep.
And for Maranoa...
Oh, yeah, there's one even at 3%, so yeah, 5% I'm being generous to those councils.
Right.
Yep.
And Maranoa and Mount Isa, that's a function of population?
It would be, because they're the two largest in the Western Queensland Alliance Council area, yes.
Great. Thanks for that. I just flag, Scott will be able to hang around a bit after I call the hearing to a close. But I just wanted to go to the phone first to make sure you had an opportunity to make any other points as we sum up. It's just that I need to be walking out the door shortly. As I said, Scott will be able to hang around for those in the room to have additional conversations. But can we go to you first, Barry? Any final thoughts, having heard a fair bit of evidence today, that you wanted to make?
Thanks, Chair. I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. I think the executive summary is a very comprehensive overview of the challenges, the key factors, the current barriers. It's all written there, and I would urge the people that are on the end of this information gathering exercise that they have their antennas up and make sure that this information is not disregarded in any way, shape or form, because it's very important for shires like us up in the north and the northwest and across the western parts of this great state. And it has got credibility, and I just hope that we get the outcomes that the information deserves. Thanks very much.
Good on you. Thanks very much, Barry. Janine, did you want to make any final points, please?
I'm a new mayor, and I'm in a little small council, but yes, I think our WAC submission is quite thorough, and I think it some things could be taken from that would be great. At the end of the day, I think our majority of our small councils have proven that they can do the job. And as Barry said, we've got the credibility, but, you know, we just need a little helping hand to keep growing as any small child would. So, yeah, I'll leave it with that.
So just trying to find you on the map, Janine. Whereabouts is McKinley?
So Julia Creek is the town.
Yep.
So we're between either side of Richmond and Cloncurry Shires. We currently have 6 vanadium mines knocking on our back door.
Beautiful.
So, and we're ones that are about a 3% rate-based revenue and rely very heavily on grants and funding.
And what GDP would go out of there in the way of cattle and mining?
Not to mention the critical minerals that are coming online, yeah.
Well, I'm not good with figures, but a
You
fair
can say
bit.
a lot.
Maybe Greg would.
A lot. A lot. Yeah.
I'm just going to, yeah, very much. And yeah, we're a good, hard-working community, and we just need that incentives and some houses. And we get phone calls every day. People want to come. They're sick of the cities. And I think we could help the government by getting people out of the cities, bring them to the bush, because there's a lot to offer. There's economic benefits for, you know, we've got plenty of land, plenty of opportunity. So we're just waiting for you, but we just need a little bit of help.
Yeah. Well said, Mayor.
Thank you.
Well said. And just finally on the phone, David, did you have any final thoughts before we go to those in the room and wrap up?
I would just reiterate Sam O'Toole's opening statement that this is an ongoing systemic one, financial sustainability of local government. There's a real opportunity here, and we have we've demonstrated our economic value to Australia, to the income pool. To reiterate also there what Janine Fegan said, I think it's beneficial to continue a decentralised Australia. There is a return for everyone, but if we do decentralise, we've got to provide the critical infrastructure, we've got to provide the financial sustainability of these remote and rural regions. So for their value, but also to the value of the Australian economy. And I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thanks.
Very well said as well, David. Thank you. And to those in the room, and I've got to say, I'm not going to say it was the best submission, but it was very comprehensive, and it's the amount of work that's gone into it. I really appreciate that, and I can assure Barry and others that are listening that the submission is read, and your emphasis on different things today are clear. So any final thoughts from those in the room? Simone?
Mr. Chair, if I can just encourage the committee to think about what it can do in the short term. Obviously, a lot of the issues that have been discussed are complex, they're structural, they're quite long-term in nature in terms of getting them through government as well. Something that could immediately be done to help local governments is just eliminate the annual prepayment of FAGs. Like that in itself, it's largely an administrative issue that could be done quite easily, causes a great degree of angst for councils as well as audit officers, no doubt around the country. I know it does in Queensland. Low-hanging fruit that could be done quite rapidly and easily and would absolutely make a positive impact for local government.
We've heard that a number of times during different submissions. Can we make a question up to the
broader point? Yeah, but also take the point that there's systemic things that need looking at, but your point is around short term.
Because we want to understand whether or not it's the federal government or the state government or a combination of both. And at the moment, we're unsure.
We've heard different.
Yeah.
So would you like to make a final comment on that?
I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on that FA grant prepayment comment. I think it is a combination of both. My understanding is that the federal government in this financial year that just closed was very late in making the payments to the states. My understanding is that all states made that prepayment to their councils prior to the end of financial year, bar Queensland. And so we are in an unusual circumstance where the prepayment was made at the start of the 24-25 financial year. So our financial year end 24 looks devastating, particularly for rural and remote, because many of us are carrying forward massive deficits because we didn't receive prepayment. So I suppose gut instinct, it is both levels.
Is that do you think that's to bolster the state's financial positions at a particular reporting time?
I don't believe so, because they can't account for it as their money, because they are but a post box. So it's not as though it is reflecting the health of their, or better reflecting the health of their balance sheet by holding it.
Thanks, Greg. And I invite you all to muse on such issues and other issues, but we just need to close at the moment. Thanks so much. For those on the line, from wherever you are, north, central, southwestern Queensland, we really appreciate the economic and social richness that you bring to our nation. It's been great to chat with you today. We've got a comprehensive submission from you, and we'll send you a transcript of the evidence from today, so you'll have an opportunity to just have a read through it, make sure it's correct, and I declare this hearing closed.